Redditors, were you ever that one in a million person? If so, what's your story? So, one day there was a sudden windstorm while I was in an open parking lot on the outskirts of a city. A leaf flew right into my eye, and it immediately started to hurt. I somehow drove home and my eyes were constantly hurting. I washed it a few times, didn't work. I started to feel movement inside my eye, but couldn't see anything in the mirror. I freaked out and started gently poking around in my eye with my index finger. A tiny little dot came out and moved a little on the tip of my finger, ran to my mom, showed her, and she couldn't see anything. To be honest, it was so freaking tiny and barely moved. It hurt for an hour and I had found 2 more tiny moving freaks for my eye. I was convinced I wasn't just seeing things. Then, finally, my mom took me to an eye surgeon, went in as an emergency. The doc examined and rushed me to an operating room saying I had living microorganisms inside my eye. Took about 20 minutes and they removed all 14 of them, alive. Got a patch like a pirate that I had to wear for a few days. Doc said he'd never seen anything like it in his 25 years of experience. He said I was a 1 in a million case, and if I had taken a day to come in, chances are high that I would be blind. Edit. So, people are asking what bugs they were. I never knew, nor did the doctor. It was his private eye clinic, no other research departments. The bugs were like the most translucent, tiniest microorganism, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. I could look at them based on their tiny movements that I felt, and they looked closer to larvae. Story number 3. I was so freakishly allergic to ant and bee venom as a child that a single sting from a single little common black ant put me into anaphylactic shock. When my allergist was preparing to start immunotherapy for me, he found that the in-office lab equipment wasn't sensitive enough to measure the infinitesimally small amount of allergen with which to start my titration. So he had to send a sample of my blood to Johns Hopkins so that their lab could determine how much to give me. I did immunotherapy for several years to reach an immune response level at which it would be safe for me to basically exist in a non-frozen climate. Good news though, I'm good now. I've had a few run-ins with ants and wasps since my immunotherapy, and my body didn't freak out and shut down. And research indicates that if it hasn't done that after this long, I'm probably safe for maybe forever. I don't have EpiPens, and I'm not overly afraid of ants or bees. Edit. Whoa, overnight response. To answer a few questions, first, I live in Florida. I'm not outdoorsy, but stinging things are everywhere. It is in fact the Australia of North America. And no, my parents would not move me to the frozen tundra to be a nomadic reindeer herder at my behest. Continuing, little black ants do in fact sting. Several Lasius subspecies have stingers and venom. Then, when an ant bites you, that's using their mandibles and does not deliver venom. When an ant stings you, that's using their butt needle and delivers the pain juice. Most ants do one or the other. Fire ants do both at the same time. And finally, I did some research a while back and found an academic paper that indicated that if I haven't had a reaction after this many years, the likelihood that I ever would again is vanishingly rare. I wish I could find it again right now, but I am already late getting ready for work, so if I find it later, I will post it. I feel completely safe having a cell phone instead of an EpiPen. Story number 5. Not sure about the odds on this one, but I survived a non-survivable plane crash. I was on an old PO2, famous for being very safe and uncrushable, on a tour of the desert in western China when I was like 7. My father's friend who hosted me and piloted the plane didn't survive, but somehow I got out with a concussion and apparently passed out for almost a day in the middle of the desert in the wreckage of the crash 50 kilometers from the town/airport on the edge of the desert. The people who found me were some tree planters. They plant greens in the desert to protect towns from sandstorm. A lot of people live in the desert towns in China do this, and they found me on their way picking up a shipment, and the only reason they looked was because they were making a bet on how fast the egg would cook in the sand and went off the road to test it. Edit. First things first. According to legends, 15 minutes, I never tested it though. So, according to my dad's, the theory that I might have lived was because the plane was mostly made out of fabrics and wood. So when the plane crashed, the front half collapsed and took the majority of the impact. Though I got knocked out, I was probably covered under the wreckage and in the shades. It cooled me off enough to survive for a day or so. Story number 8. How I met my wife. I'm from the Netherlands. She is from the US. We met in Israel. It was my first weekend in Israel. Decided to go on a pub crawl to meet some people and have fun. As I'm buying the ticket, my now wife walks up to the counter to also buy a ticket. The girl working there introduces us. We hit it off the first night, but I'm leaving in 2 days to stay with friends of friends in the middle of the desert for 3 months. 2 days after I leave, I lose my phone. I don't have any way to get back in touch with her. I had little money and could stay and work with people in the desert, but I kept thinking about her, so after a week, I say I'm leaving. I take the next bus, and it goes 3 times a week at 5 a.m., and then a train to Tel Aviv. I had no idea how to find her, where to stay, and very little money. I email a couple of hostels to find a work/stay agreement. Those jobs are very popular and usually planned months in advance, though. Well, I got an email back when I arrive in Tel Aviv, and I come in for an interview because they have a spot. This is already ridiculously lucky. Right after the interview and dropping off my belongings, I went back to the first hostel to see if they would give me information. They wouldn't give me anything. Now I'm at a loss. Tel Aviv is a city of more than 500,000 people. I don't know anyone, and have little more than the clothes on my back. Kind of defeated, I start wandering around, exploring the city. After a couple of hours, I get hungry and decide to treat myself to a restaurant. I'm well out of the tourist area and find myself at a place that's almost empty and rather cheap. I sit down, order a drink and something to eat. As I get my food, I see my now wife walking past the restaurant. She sees me, I see her. I'm literally dumbstruck and I just kind of grin and wave. Remember how I lost my phone? She didn't know that and just thought I ignored her. She waves and keeps walking. I throw like 200 shekels, which is way too much, on the table, and I sprint after her. And I explained, and the rest is history. So everybody, you know what this story vaguely reminds me of in a certain kind of way? The movie Before Sunrise. What a great movie. Okay, watch it. It's my favorite movie. Just saying, if you want a movie to watch. Anyway, next story. Story number 9. I lived in Florida for the first 18 years of my life and spent most of my free time outdoors, fishing, camping, what have you. The summer before my junior year of high school, I found myself out hiking nearby my home with a buddy. We were stomping around in some clay deposits inside of a little ravine. Even minimal geographic relief is dramatic in a place as flat as the Gulf Coast. And when it started to Florida rain, for those of you who can't relate, imagine a torrential downpour. Our minds immediately jumped to the exciting possibility of a flash flood raging through the crevices that we were exploring. In an effort to make our day more exciting and not take any chances, we began to climb vertically out of the canyons versus taking the lengthy path out of it horizontally. We got to the top, put our feet on the ground, and did pull up. As I stood up, I felt the ground underneath me squirm. I had stepped on a snake. I screamed and kicked the snake that was latched onto my foot off of me by reflex, and as an Eagle Scout, I immediately recognized the red on yellow pattern as the snake slithered away and knew it was a coral snake. We rushed home, drove to the hospital, and were seen. The doctors informed my parents that the nearest anti-venin was a 3-hour helicopter ride away. The first symptom, lung failure, which would occur after 2 hours. My parents called my friends and family, and we all spent time together without me knowing my fate. My friends and family arrived and subsequently left together. My parents turned off the lights and we prayed together. Around 2 hours after being bitten, a nurse came into our dark room with a gurney to collect my dead body. I asked her, "Has there been any developments?" To her surprise, the doctors came in shocked that I was alive and told me it was a dry bite and that I should remain to whatever religion I practiced. Edit. I just woke up, but I'll try to answer some of your questions before classes. 1. The 1 in 1 million is mainly getting bitten by the snake in the first place, but also subsequently surviving. And 2, I'm Christian, Lutheran, just in case you were curious. Story number 10. When I was 14 years old, I woke up one day with heavy stomach cramps. We called the hospital and they told us that I probably have a stomach flu and should go to the doctor the next morning. After one of the worst nights ever, vomiting and sleeping next to the toilet, we went to the doctor. I had a fever of 40 Celsius and was aching a lot. The doctor told me I had to go to the ER and have it checked out because she thought my appendix was inflamed and causing the pain. We went to the ER and I stayed in the hospital for about 2 weeks, but they couldn't find anything. They treated me with broad-range antibiotics, and after 2 weeks I was feeling a bit better and they told me to go home and recover. The night I got back from the hospital, I went to bed and started hallucinating that I lived in a retirement home and that pirates were coming to steal our food. So I was flailing around trying to fend off pirates when my mother came in and asked me what all the fuss was about. I told her what was going on and she looked at me like I had summoned a devil. She took my temperature and she instantly took me to the ER again. I had a 41 Celsius fever. When we got back to the hospital, I got treated immediately immediately for inflation, and they did a wide range of tests again. They saw that something in my body was inflamed, but they could not find it. I stayed in the hospital for about 2 more weeks when they finally found what was going on. My appendix was inflamed and burst the night I was having the hallucinations, but on all of the scans, they couldn't see my appendix. The doctor told me that if I came in 2 days later, I would have died because of the pus flowing in my body. Apparently, there was a 1% chance of all the appendix cases that the appendix is so stretched out that they couldn't see it on the scans, or that area was so inflamed that they didn't see it. So, after staying on antibiotics for about 2 more weeks, they finally removed my appendix and all the pain was gone. I stayed in the hospital for over 4 weeks just because of my appendix and bad luck on being that 1%. Story number 11. Over 2,000 comments here. I imagine this won't be seen, but whatever. Been waiting to post this somewhere. I survived earlier this month from hypothermia by walking with my brother in negative 40 degrees with wind chill to the liquor store, and we were already drunk a bit and never checked the weather. Got the bottle, headed back to chill in the fort, but I passed out. He ran to grab my dad and woke him up to get the truck. I was probably passed out for 10 minutes whilst they found me, dragged me into the truck and to the hospital, where the doctor said I didn't have a chance and my father should be waiting for the call. I remember I woke up with the doctor shoving a big-ass breathing tube in my throat, but I couldn't breathe. I was restrained to the bed trying to take it out, and I remember a nurse saying breathe. I did, once every 5 seconds. Until the doctor finally said take it out, and he did. I gasped for my life when they took it out. So relieved, I remembered. I looked at myself in a gown hooked up like a robot, wires connected to me, and 3 machines around me, and like 6 people in the room. Then the alarms on the machines went off, and I blacked out. They monitored me for 8 hours until I was stable. I died in cardiac arrest for about less than 5 minutes. Could be less, and I was revived successfully and monitored closely. I woke up a day later, seeing my mother and the brother. However, I was so high on morphine, I think I just mumbled out a few words and smiled at my mom until I passed out. I effing survived. I'm honestly glad I did survive. My hands got frostbite really bad, but it's normal now. This happened on the 10th, and I'm recovering with a new lease on life. Edit. Thanks for the kind comments, everyone. It's been hard going on from this, but I'm trying hard to keep myself together. I still don't know how to feel about the situation. Like I should be upset or sad or something. I'm not. Just really unsure of the whole situation. All I know is I need to get my life together. I could be pitiful and look for sympathy, but I'm past that. I'm going forward now. Life is short, and I gotta make the best of it. Story number 12. Not me, but my wife. We lived in Jacksonville, Florida. She rarely gets sick, and she has mild insomnia. Around Wednesday, she had a low fever and complained of aches and sweats at night and trouble sleeping. That weekend, she wanted to see the doctor. I told her she probably had the flu, just wasn't used to the aches, and she always had trouble sleeping, but if she was still feeling bad Sunday, we would go to the clinic. Saturday night, she couldn't sleep, so we made an appointment for Sunday afternoon. But on our way there, sure enough, she's feeling better. The doctor checks her out. She's feeling fine now. No fever. He says she probably had meningitis but is recovering. Now me, I'm due to go on a business trip to California the next day, Monday, and I ask him if he thinks it's fine if I go. He says, yeah, no problem. That evening, wife is eating and laughing and all is good. Monday morning, I leave early. That afternoon, my neighbor calls and lets me know that my wife was wandering in the street in a delirium. My wife didn't know where she was, so the neighbor drove her to the ER. I book a flight home that night. The hospital checks her out. She has a fever, her blood cell count is in the basement, and she is completely out of it mentally. Not sure what's wrong, and a bunch of specialists start descending on her. I have to fill out a bunch of paperwork on her medical history, where we've been, etc. They think maybe it's some weird autoimmune disorder. Not good. She gets a bunch of transfusions and put on a cocktail of meds while they figure it out. Third day in the hospital, the infectious disease guy comes in. Blood parasite. Maybe tick-borne. She'd been to the Midwest recently. Could have caught it if she went hiking in the woods or a park. Next day he comes in. Figured out the parasite. Why didn't you tell me he left the country, he says. Huh? She hasn't. Well, she has malaria. Malaria? I thought you couldn't get that in the US. You can't. You need to go home and bring me her passport. What the hell? So I retrieve her passport. The CDC comes, does a whole case study on her, which they wouldn't release to us. Mosquito traps are set up around the neighborhood. Mysterious vans start driving by spewing clouds of stuff. My wife stays in the ICU for a week, but recovers just fine. Now, if you look at the 2010 CDC infectious disease report, you'll see a discussion of malaria and how the XX number of cases are all related to people recently returned from endemic areas, except for one woman in Duval County, Florida, who received it from a cryptic vector. So, like every story we've read so far, there's an edit to this one. I'm not going to read it because because it has a bunch of medical terms that I can't pronounce, but it essentially is just restating in medical terms what happened to OP's wife. And she got malaria from a cryptic unknown source. That is scary and weird. So, what are you guys thinking? Alien probe, secret double life? She went to malaria in her sleep and then woke up back in the United States? Hold on. Malaria is not a place. I apologize. Malaria is not a location, and even if it was, I don't think anybody would want to go there. Anyway, next story. Story number 13. This probably won't make it very high up, but my parents love telling the story of how I shouldn't have been born. My mother and father were both in previous marriages and had divorced. My dad had 3 kids, and my mother had 1. In order for my mother to get pregnant, she went through about 7 years of reproductive therapy before my sister was finally conceived. Fast forward to my parents' relationship, my dad got a vasectomy. Combined with the fact that my mother was 40 with a handful of medical and reproductive issues, conceiving a child should have been damn near impossible. My parents thought the same thing, so they didn't really take any other precautions, and my mother didn't try to have a pregnancy-friendly lifestyle because she assumed that a child would never happen. My mother smoked cigarettes too. Not sure of the amount, but probably half a pack each day if I had to guess. She also worked around hazardous chemicals, the kind where you have to wear a hazmat suit when working with them. She also went to amusement parks and had an occasional drink. My parents did nearly everything possible to prevent and terminate a pregnancy. Some intentional, some unintentional. My mother didn't even find out she was pregnant until about 5 to 6 months in. So there were 2 trimesters where she did things that a pregnant woman should not be doing. All things considered, I should have never even existed. And even by the slim chance that I did exist, I should have been born with some kind of mental or physical disability. There are hundreds, probably even thousands of studies of why women shouldn't smoke and drink while pregnant. Studies of women over 35 having higher chances of having a kid with Down syndrome. Amusement parks have warnings about pregnant women not going on certain rides. But even if I did have a disability, it was too late to abort mission 6 months in. So, by some weird miracle, life decided to say F biology and poof my healthy brain and body into existence anyway. Story number 14. Man. People might not believe that this is 100% true. My girlfriend had a child and we had no idea she was pregnant at all. She's 5'4" and 140 pounds. Not super skinny, but definitely not fat. She had no belly to tell it. When my son was born, I looked back and some attitude changes made sense, and it made sense that she couldn't run, but otherwise, she was 100% flat. Never showed signs of pregnancy. I had just turned 21 6 days previous, and she was feeling really sick throughout the day. I had some buddies over to drink, and she felt sick. She lived with her parents at the time. She ended up going to the hospital. They told her she most likely had salmonella poisoning. After pulling blood, they told her she was pregnant, and a few minutes later, told her she was in labor. Crazy thing is, 3 months previous, she had gotten an IUD and passed the piss test, so they put it in. Because I was drinking with friends at home, I had no idea what was happening. She called me around 7:30 a.m. to tell me, and I was shook in the most negative way possible. We had always agreed to never have a kid. I was freaking out. I hated this. But I showed up. Her parents were of course awkward, but of course it was great experiences. As far as things you never expected and hoped would never happen could go, after a few hours at the hospital, I left to take a shower and eat, spent about 30 minutes in a Taco Bell freaking out, and went back to go on with my life. I love my son. I never thought I'd be in this situation, but I'm so glad I am, no matter how hard it gets. Story number 15. I have an uncommon but not overly rare autoimmune condition, but the version that I have has been recorded only a handful of times ever. I was diagnosed with a variant of something called acute Guillain-Barré syndrome. In the more conventional form, you basically have ascending paralysis, and it often results in long-term hospitalization, often in the ICU on a ventilator, because it also attacks the heart and lungs. It can be acute, very aggressive but temporary, or chronic, and both forms are complex and require specialist care. Unlike almost every other case of this condition, I don't have true paralysis. I have what my neurologist refers to as the sensory variant of GBS. Basically, the only damage I suffered was to sensory nerves. So, while being exceptionally painful and making it very hard to move and function, I have gotten off incredibly lightly. While going through the condition with my various health professionals, we uncovered about 12 cases claiming to be this, but most of them were debunked in more recent papers. So, while my body has screwed me over, it's in the rarest and mildest way. Story number 16. My bones didn't grow properly, or their end more precisely. Doctors don't know what the actual disease is because all of my bones are affected and my muscles and ligaments are also crippled. It was discovered when I was 4 because I cried when I had to walk. My doctors back then tried to fix it with multiple surgeries, conservative surgeries, but all of them failed and left me with a weak body, lots of muscle weight, and can't get it back because every move was painful. The biggest pain was in my legs because they have to carry my whole body weight. As a final solution, my doctors recommended that I have to live my life in a wheelchair, but I refused it. Then I got a new doctor who immediately operated on me and got me hip bone prosthesis, both sides. Over the 20 years in pain changed my persona, but with the prosthesis, I have much less and can handle myself and live my life. I'm waiting for my knee replacements as well. In the meantime, at least I can go hiking and swimming, so I can build up my muscles slowly. Finally, doctors think it is a type of Perth's disease. Story number 17. Not sure if it's 1 in 1 million, but it's pretty rare, so I will write about it here. I have a medical condition called cyclic vomiting syndrome that causes frequent, unexpected bouts of nausea and vomiting. It's triggered by a multitude of different things. In my case, the worst offenders now seem to be a lack of sleep, stress, anxiety, or other sicknesses like the flu. When I was just a child, I began to throw up uncontrollably around the same time every month. None of the doctors my parents took me to had any idea what was causing it, but my dad's sister, also a doctor, did some digging and noticed that I exhibited some very similar signs to someone diagnosed with this fairly newly discovered condition. My childhood was shaped by monthly visits to a nearby hospital to receive IV fluid to prevent dehydration, where they knew me by name and my trusty green bucket. I can recall a number of my own birthday parties and summer camp sessions that had to be cut short due to the occurrence of a dreaded episode that put me back in the hospital. One of my fondest memories of elementary school was my teacher having my class call me to sing happy birthday as I had gotten sick during my birthday party the day prior. As I grew older and life in school became more stressful, I missed upwards of 30 days of school per year, and for fear of being labeled, no one but my close friends and my teachers knew the reason why. Even to this day, as a college student, my condition still hangs around, causing me to miss class around once a week. But I have no more stomach pain during episodes, and much less frequent vomiting, but just as frequent nausea. But man, I do my best to push through it. When I'm not feeling like I want to throw up, I'm just a normal, fully functioning young adult. That's all I ever wanted to be growing up, normal. I'm never fully going to get there, but that's okay. For anyone facing a chronic illness like me, all that matters is that you make the best out of what you have. Never be afraid of being judged, because if someone judges you for something you have no control over, they're not worth your time, energy, or thoughts. If anyone else shares my condition or wants to know more about it, feel free to ask. I wrote this more for myself as I've been struggling a bit lately at school and I needed some reassurance, but I would be super happy if this touched somebody else. Thanks for reading. Story number 18. I have a hypersensitivity to dextromethorphan. That's the active ingredient in cough syrup. I've never been one to experiment with drugs. I never liked smoking pot or drinking, and there was a long history of addiction in my family. I pretty much said F that crap from an early age. My friends, on the other hand, loved all that crap. I was around 18 when my buddies started robot tripping. I don't know if it's still called this, and they were doing it on a consistent basis. For the uninitiated, you drink a bottle of Robitussin and trip your balls off for 6 to 8 hours. Anyways, my friends did this constantly for months and they always bugged me to join in. Months and months of peer pressure until I finally caved. I agreed to do it one time as long as they shut the F up and didn't ask me to do anything with them ever again. On a Friday, I go to a buddy's house and drink a bottle of this disgusting liquid. I sat around for an hour or two wondering if anything would happen or if I was just going to feel nauseous for the rest of the night. And then bam, I'm rolling around on the floor in complete confusion. Bam, I see my buddy in the corner staring at the ceiling. Bam, I'm in a recliner begging for sleep so this terrible feeling goes away. I wake up the next day and I sit there for a few minutes, confused. It was like trying to think through pudding. I really needed to use the bathroom too, but my legs wouldn't respond. I am further confused. I slide my way out of the chair and army crawl to the bathroom, slowly pull myself onto the toilet, finish, and then army crawl back to the chair. Wake up sometime later at the prodding of my buddies, and I'm still extremely groggy and unfocused, but ask for help standing up. I cannot stand up on my own. While my friends find it hilarious, I am getting more and more concerned. What the F was going on? Later on, the doctor would also tell me of this hypersensitivity that a small percentage of people have. He would also tell me that I had essentially overdosed on drugs. Me, the guy who never tried anything, had OD'd and my hoodlum friends had not. fan-effing-tastic. This high that I had subjected myself to lasted for an entire week. Here's a few of the highlights that my stupid self did while under the influence of this damn evil cough syrup. First, I drove, even though I could barely walk, let alone function. Holy crap. I went to a job interview. I was offered the job too, but I turned it down and scolded the employer for offering me part-time hours. I got the gig full-time a little later. Then, a few days into this, I stalked around the house with a letter opener, hunting vampires while making really weird noises. I'm glad I didn't stab anyone. Then I laid under the bushes out in front of the house for a few hours while it rained. When asked what I was doing, I replied, hiding from Charlie. Then, I unknowingly and without consent had my hand up a 15-year-old girl's shirt. Said girl had a huge crush on 18-year-old me. During the Super Bowl party, she ended up sitting next to me, as I was only able to focus on one thing. I didn't notice. Commercials come on and my attention is drawn to where my hand was. I turned to see said girl with a huge smile on her face. I remove my hand and tell her to go away. My friends laugh, and then the game comes back on and I watch. Commercial break. Same effing thing. I beg my friends to get this girl away from me, but they laugh because they're effing a-holes. This continues throughout the game, and it only ended when finally the girl I was seeing saw this transpiring at the Super Bowl party. She was there the whole time, but I didn't notice. When we locked eyes, the anger in her face was enough to get me up and into my car. I drove home. And also another thing, I shaved my dog. Side note, the 15-year-old girl had been pursuing me for some time up until that point, like getting on top of me while I was sleeping over at a friend's house and trying to hold me down while grinding on me. Crap was effed up. After 7 days, though, I finally started to feel like myself again. 4 days of pure insanity and 3 more of what felt like sleepwalking. I tried to patch things up with the girl I was seeing, but she thought I was full of crap and I didn't blame her. It was too stupid to be believable. So yeah, I don't take cough medicine anymore. So I'd like to imagine that OP wasn't even looking for a job. He just said, I'm gonna apply for something real quick. Got it? Stumbled and drove himself there and then just said, nah, this ain't for me. And then he got offered better hours by trash talking someone. What a real go-getter. Maybe we should all get a little tipsy or high or OD just a little bit, just a teeny tiny bit for a week and just see what happens. Why not? Please don't actually do that though. And also, side note, I have a friend who I have not seen sober for 2 to 3 years until this week. Like, literally, think of somebody you see once or twice a month and they're high for 3 years. 3 years you've never seen someone sober. It's insane. I can't believe I actually caught him sober. And I was like, hey, Josh, what are you gonna do later? I'm gonna get high, dude. Can you believe it? No, Joshua, I can't believe it. Oh, God bless that man. Anyway, next story. Story number 19. It's more of a something that happened rather than something I am. I don't know if this story really fits the question, but it's the only thing that comes to mind. So, about a year ago, I parked my car at the university campus, parking next to my buddy's car, took a picture of both of our cars, and I went to class. An hour later, my phone rings. It's a police officer who got my number from university's help desk. He asks me to immediately come out to my car. I had a small amount of weed in my car, hidden well though, so my mind went directly to that. I could see my car from like half a mile away, and I saw about 10 cops surrounding it. Later, I found out there were only 4 cops, 4 campus security, and 2 guys dressed in black. Well, when I get close to my car, they confirmed it was me, and asked to look at my recent pictures and confirmed that indeed I was the guy. They asked me to open my vehicle and started searching. Then, they arrested me for intimidating someone. The whole way to the police station, the cops kept telling me that I had effed up. It was good that the cops arrested me because I effed up with a psychopath, and I would have been dead if he would have found me before the cops. I still don't know what the F they were talking about. Then the questioning went on for 2 hours, and they kept saying that they had me on camera. I should stop denying I wasn't involved with this. Then, after 2 hours, they allowed me to call my lawyer, but since I didn't have one, I called my dad who works 5 minutes away from the police station. He was there pretty quickly, and since he had all the details of this case, he was able to convince the cops and the psychopath that I wasn't involved in whatever they were accusing me of. That day, I understood that a similar photo of what I had taken before I went to class was sent to someone who was being harassed and intimidated through Instagram. I had never parked my car next to my buddy's car like that, so I was quite sure the other photo was taken the same day during that 1 hour interval between me parking there and the photo being sent. The cops and university security said that there was no one else there during that 1 hour taking a photo, so maybe I sent it to someone, but I was sure that the photo I took never left my phone. The guy who was harassed called his dad, the psychopath, and he was there to either beat me really bad or end my life. Luckily, the security called the cops and I was arrested, so the cops weren't talking out of their asses when they said I was better off arrested. The next day, I went to campus security office and demanded to look at the camera. Except for me, only some girls are seen getting into a car and leaving, so we slowed the video down, and indeed, they stopped the car for about 5 seconds at the exact place the photo was taken. They were later called to the security office and accepted that they were the ones that did it. It still boggles my mind how my simple decision to take a picture of my and my buddy's cars almost landed me in jail. Story number 20. I suppose this is late to the party and not a rare disease, but I guess I'll throw mine in. More of a 1 in 100,000, or maybe 500,000. I work in aviation, and I applied where I work for a pilot position. They said I wasn't experienced enough and that I should come back in a year. They would give me the job then. Granted, I had already been working with them for 3 years, so I thought another year wouldn't hurt. Although, I was getting too old to be accepted to get into pilot training. A year and a lot of experience later, I asked if they would be having another hiring process, pilot board, and the answer was no. Not this year because of a transition to a new model aircraft that we're getting. Everyone was going off to training, so there wasn't going to be a board that year, and that I should try again next year. That bothered me. So I looked around and I knew some guys who were from another unit to the south of me. This is one of the most sought-after units in this particular area of flying. A lot of potential pilots want this job. I called in every favor I had, got letters of recommendation, rushed the unit, and bought them beer, went drinking with them, spiral ringed my resume, and passed all of the tests. The interview was tough, and there was a lot of other guys interviewing. I didn't know how well I did, but I felt all right. I was driving home the 5 hours north after the interview, and as I pulled into my driveway, I got a call from my contact at the interview base. And then he said to me, "Congratulations, you've been selected as a primary for the pilot position." And all of the guys from the interview were cheering over the speaker. And yes, I know it sounds like one of those and then everyone clapped moments, but I was pretty much in tears as this had been my life goal. I called my dad and he was more excited than I was. Anyways, I know it's not the 1 in 1 million, but I thought it was pretty lucky to pull this off. Anyway, thanks for reading if you got it all the way through. Story number 21. Not 1 in a million, but when James Bond Quantum of Solace was released to my local theater on opening night, there was a big deal made of it, and the cinema decided to do giveaways by shooting prizes, free movie tickets, which were wrapped in Quantum of Solace t-shirts, and fire them from the mall rooftop using a t-shirt potato gun firing contraption. The grand prize was free movie tickets for a year. My group of friends had shown up early and saw the crowd gathering of maybe 1,000 people in the parking lot below and decided to join in. We thought it best to spread out, and when the t-shirts started firing, I noticed I was catching a lot because I was surrounded by smaller kids. Anyway, I noticed how disappointed they were when none of them could catch anything, and I was holding 10 roughly wrapped t-shirts in my hand, so I decided to start giving them away. My friend came through the crowd and asked what I was doing, so I explained it was just a bit of fun, and what were the chances I would win free movie tickets for a year anyway. I told him I would keep just one, so I took one out of the pile and stuffed it inside my jacket and have the rest away, continued catching more and gave them all away. Well, when it was all over, my friends and I gathered in a circle, and the ones who caught a t-shirt won some free movie tickets. Then I proceeded to open one t-shirt that I caught, and there was this large piece of paper in it. As I opened it, I read out loud, "Free movies for a year, holy crap!" And my friends couldn't believe it. I managed to snag the one t-shirt with the grand prize, especially after giving away so many. Story number 22. Two things, both medical. 1. Growing up, I was a pretty healthy kid, except for developing Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, but that didn't bother me much. Going into my 20s, however, my body seemed determined to self-destruct. First, I developed type 1 diabetes out of the blue, then costochondritis. And then after that, I got pleurisy, and then fibromyalgia, then gastroparesis, then chronic kidney stones due to a metabolic problem, then neuropathy, although that was no surprise. I sucked at taking care of myself in those early years. So, when my gallbladder went bad the night before a Lana Del Rey concert that I really would have liked to see, still bitter about that, I thought, okay, this sucks, but if you remove it, you're done. So, I got my gallbladder removed, laparoscopically, and went home to recover. Only, I wasn't feeling better. I was exhausted, and for some reason, I was retaining a lot of water. I'm talking over 20 pounds. As 2 weeks went by, the doctor's office assured me it was just water gain from the surgery and not to worry. At one point, though, I literally couldn't go 5 steps steps without falling on a couch or chair. I went for my surgical follow-up and my surgeon noted I looked pale. I started telling him about my weird symptoms and he asked me some questions. His eyes grew wide and he said he was sending me to the ER immediately. First, they admitted me to the tachycardia wing. I had no idea what was happening. First, they drained 2 liters of fluid from my lungs. Then, they put me immediately on diuretics and other meds I don't remember. I was pretty out of it at the time. They were giving me Dilaudid on top of everything else. Eventually, a doctor came in and bluntly said, "You have congestive heart failure." And I remember thinking, blinking, laughing, and saying, "But not like failure, right? Amazing the mental gymnastics you can do when you're terrified." "No," he explained, "you have congestive heart failure." I cried, but they reassured me that this could be managed with medication in time. The doctor held my hand. My family came and they calmed me down, except for ending up with MRSA in my nose. Had to be quarantined for a week or so. The rest of the hospital stay was pretty uneventful. So after I was stable, I went home with new stretch marks from just how much water weight I gained, then lost, and new medication. I visited a heart hospital weekly at first, then got better and went to monthly appointments, then every 2 months, then every 5. My progress was mostly steady and linear, with only one dip in function. Curiously enough, after I broke up with my fiance, never underestimate the effect stress can have on your body. Then last September, 2 years after the failure, I had an appointment. My cardiologist came in grinning. He told me flabbergasted but happy as hell that my heart was now normal. There had been no lasting tissue damage. My ejection fraction, basically how well your heart squeezes, was now considered normal. Although I'd have to stay on medication, I was effectively cured. He said it was so rare, it was a miracle. He told me that when I was first admitted to the hospital, my ejection fraction was below 10%. They briefly put me on the transplant list, and were pretty sure I would die. Somehow, though, I clawed my way back up to a healthy and normal heart. He told me I should try my luck in Vegas. And then there's the second thing. When I get sick, a flu or whatever, my blood sugar can get a bit high, which is pretty normal. However, when I get really sick, well, this one time in particular, my blood sugar got so out of control I blacked out for 3 days. My mom found me on the floor naked for some reason. My eyes were open and I was panting, but I wasn't really there. I couldn't speak or move. She called the paramedics and they rushed me to the hospital. They confirmed I was in diabetic ketoacidosis, but something else was wrong. They run some tests and I come up positive for propylene glycol. The doctors asked my mother if I had been wanting to self-unalive, if I could have ingested this myself. My whole family ended up tearing apart my room looking for possible poisons, and they immediately sent the test results to UC Davis. I was worsening fast. I went into heart and kidney failure. I was in the ICU. I was intubated and sedated heavily. They told my mom I was critical. Basically, I was supposed to die. They decided to give me the propylene glycol antidote, even though a few doctors had talked to my mom about the ketoacidosis being the real issue at hand. But it worked. In fact, the cardiologist in my first story was present when they administered it, and he said it was absolutely remarkable how quickly I improved. I was kept in the ICU and sedated, but I was coming out of the woods. They eventually lifted the sedation despite how agitated I became, and I went through insane withdrawals from being on those powerful drugs for so long. But I was coming back to life, and quickly. The doctors got the test results back, and they said that the test had been a false positive for propylene glycol. The bungled result, in fact, was a result of the chemical processes of diabetic ketoacidosis. So why did the antidote work? I wonder to this day what really happened. All I know is there's 3 days that preceded the ER trip, and I don't remember a minute of them. So I escaped death a second time by the skin of my teeth. The ER doctor told me the acetone level in my blood was pretty far beyond the fatal limit, and it was nothing short of miraculous that I not only survived, but regained full organ control so quickly, within 2 weeks of leaving the hospital. He told me, too, that I ought to try my luck in Vegas. Okay, so I'm gonna make this one really quick, but I gotta vent a little. First off, I'm happy that OP seems to have cheated Death twice, and I'm sure Death is not very happy that OP seems to keep escaping him, but oh my god, if there's one thing I do not like about my job reading these things, it is medical terms, because I have to pause every time and look them up and learn how to pronounce them. And some of these things that OP mentioned that he just spewed around these medical terms, they didn't even exist. I couldn't even find pronunciations of them, at least not on how to
to pronounce.com, which is my best friend at times like these, but it just makes my blood boil. Okay, that's it. That's nothing relevant about the story. I just had to vent a little. I hate medical terms. Anyway, next story.
Story number 23. During a sleep study when I was little, after I had sleeping problems, they discovered I'm basically a zombie. I have insomnia and trouble going to sleep, but when I do finally get to sleep, I don't wake up easily. This is because when I do sleep, everything shuts off. My heart stopped, brain activity dropped next to nothing, I didn't move or breathe at all. They had to wake me up several times, and the doctor said they couldn't figure out what was going on. Finally, they let me sleep, and I stayed in a state of near death for 2 hours, then woke up just fine. This still happens to me, and as a result, I don't have dreams or a sense of time passing when I sleep. I fall asleep, and I wake up instantly. From my perspective, this has led to even more sleep issues and brain problems, as well as random pains, heart palpitations, and muscle spasms. And there's basically nothing anyone can do because they don't know what's going on with me. I've also survived entire weeks without sleeping, several times during the start of my insomnia when I was 7 years old, and I have managed to not completely lose my mind. Not completely, anyways. Story number 24. I have a rare genetic disorder in the eyes called retinitis pigmentosa. I think only a little over 2,000 Americans have been diagnosed with it. It is a degenerative disease that slowly takes away your field of vision, and there's no way to correct it with any sort of glasses or surgery. I went to a ton of all different sorts of eye doctors, and while trying to explain it, they looked at me and were like, what? Because they had never heard of anything like it, and most tests showed nothing wrong. I think the simplest way to explain it is take the middle cardboard part of a paper towel, roll it up, and put it up to your eye and look through it like you used to pretend you were a pirate when you were younger. That is basically what I can see in my right eye. My left eye is not as bad, but both are slowly getting worse over time. I'm apparently one of the luckier ones who still has my central field of vision, at least, because the area that it spreads can be random. My doctor guessed I may be effectively blind by the age of around 50. I'm 25 now, so at least I still have a ways to go. And there actually wasn't any sort of cure until a couple of months ago, but it's about $800,000 as of right now. It's expensive, but for the longest time I figured I just have to deal with going blind. At least now there's hope for us, as well as many other people with other rare genetic disorders. Story number 25. This might get buried, but whatever. I witnessed what might be a literal once-in-a-collective-lifetime event involving a bad beat jackpot at a live poker table. So, small background. A bad beat is when your amazing hand gets beaten by even a better amazing hand. The casino I was playing at had a minimum qualifying hand rankings of a full house, aces full of tens or better, and getting beaten by quad tens or better. So, I was playing $1 to $2 no-limit hold'em with about 6 other players at a table when a relative newbie sits down. About 30 minutes later, the new guy gets into a hand with another player, and the end result is the board showed A9. The other player made a $25 bet on the river, and the new guy folds his hand and says, "Well, all I have is a full house, you must have an ace, so I'll lose." And the other player said, as the new guy threw his cards into the Discord pile, wait, what did you say? Turns out that the new player had double J's, ace full of jacks, and mucked his hand. The other player had AQ, quad aces, queen kicker, and the pit boss gets called over. The rest of us at the table freak out because the table share of the jackpot was 1K each, but there was nothing we could do. The guy had mucked his hand and it was over. The dealer had permission to flip over his mucked cards to verify the player would have won the jackpot. Well, the poor guy would have received 10K for having the losing hand, and the other player would have received 5K for the winning hand. Then, literally 5 hands later, the same new guy, who we had been ribbing mercilessly for 20 minutes on how he cost himself 10K, gets into a hand with me and one other guy. We ended up all in after the flop, and here's how it went down. New guy has double A, I have K9, other players had QQ, flop is Q66. Turn is a Q, river is an A. New guy has aces full of queens, other guy has quad queens, and I have a busted flush. The same new guy wins 10K, other guy wins 5K, and me and the rest of the table win 1K each. We were collectively trying to figure out the odds of a bad beat qualifying hand happening to the same guy at the same table within the span of 5 hands. And by the way, bad beat jackpots can go for months without being won at a casino with 6 tables running full time. We couldn't wrap our heads around. Truly mind-boggling, and definitely more than 1 in a million. Story number 26.
When I was 16 years old and just learning to drive, I told my mom I was too tired to drive back from a music lesson. It was 5 o'clock traffic, and she didn't believe me and told me to get in the driver's side or we wouldn't be going home. So I did. We arrived at a 4-lane road, one of the busiest streets in the town, and something I had never driven in my life. And I asked her which way I should turn, and she told me to turn left. So I started to, and then she said, "No, right!" And I froze. I didn't know what to do. Next thing I know, a truck rammed into the driver's side. They had bad brakes and were on their way to the mechanics. I smacked my head on the window. The car crumpled up at my feet. The horn blared and wouldn't stop. I screamed. Emergency vehicles came. I'm pulled out of the car through the passenger side window. I'm hyperventilating. A stranger hugged me. I'm put on a stretcher and into an ambulance. I spent the afternoon waiting for tests, then carted into my own hospital room. My dad worked there, and everything is fairly hazy. Doctors told me something had chipped away at the top of my spine. I needed to wear a neck brace for 5 weeks. Eventually, we went to look at my mom's totaled car 2 days later, and she had just paid the last payment on it the day of the accident. When the mechanics who assessed it for insurance saw me standing there, they were absolutely shocked. They said I must have had a guardian angel because they've never seen a car hit like this and the person's still standing. They said I should be paralyzed or dead. Story number 27. This is more like 1 in a billion, though the only thing I got out of it was an amazing story. I'll keep this brief. My name is John. My best friend's name is Caleb. Caleb's mom is hot, and I dog him about it because that's what friends do. And Caleb's mom's name is Donna. One night, Caleb and I were drunk at a karaoke bar. I turned in my song to the DJ, but instead of putting my real name, I put John Donna, a portmanteau of my name, John, and Caleb's mom's name, Donna. The goal was to have the DJ announce up to the bar that up next is John Donna, and he did, and it was funny to me, and that was all good and well until I go up to the stage. The DJ hands me the mic, I take the mic, and that's when a woman approaches the stage and proceeds to take the mic from my hand, and I politely ask her, "What the F, lady?" To which she replies, "Nice try, a-hole, but I'm John Donna." And I look at her, and then I look at the DJ, then I look at my friend, who, by the way, did not see me write the name on the card, so therefore could not have set me up, and I say, "Your name is John Donna?" She then says yes, and then she instructs the DJ to show me her card, and there it was, John Donna written right there on the card, and not in my handwriting. I have never met nor heard of anyone with that name. Even meeting someone with that name would be 1 in a million. But to meet someone with that name while I'm out with my friend Caleb, 1 in a billion. And to meet someone with that name while out with my friend Caleb, and for us to have clashed in the way she did, 1 in a trillion? Probably. Still to this day, the most star-aligned random as F thing that's ever happened to me. Story number 28. I was 16 working at a big box crafts store. It was busy because it was right before Christmas. Each register was open and with long lines, and a large guy walks up to my register and has a ton of the die-cut supplies. This was right before the circuit machine came out. Die cuts are very expensive, if I recall correctly. Each die cartridge was like $15, and he had 40 plus and the machine. He said his wife had always wanted one, so he was surprising her with one for Christmas. The total ended up being close to $1,000, and he handed me cash. I marked the bills with a counterfeit marker, and 4 of the hundreds are fake. This was the first time I had ever seen this. I started pressing random buttons on my register to make it beep, and he said, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "Yes, because we've been so busy, it's telling me I need a manager to open the register. It's a lot of cash." I smile and walk over to our manager, who says she's calling the cops. Then, the moment she picks up the phone, an off-duty police officer in full uniform steps through the door. He was Christmas shopping. We told him what was up, and he arrested the guy. The guy was part of a huge counterfeit ring that was a major problem in the city. This mistake took him and 2 others down. Story number 29. This only happened yesterday, but here it goes. I've been collecting old photos and postcards for years. I buy them from estate sales, garage sales, flea markets, antique stores, literally anywhere and everywhere, and I have hundreds. I don't really know why I collect them, as they are complete strangers, but I find it fascinating, like a window into the past. So, last night, I randomly decided to reorganize my collection. I found this postcard in one of the boxes, and I noticed that it is addressed to Kurt Benson, which is my uncle's name. So I sent my mom a picture of it just because it was mildly interesting, and she just happened to be with him at the time, so she showed it to him. I told her it was dated 1916 and signed by a name that started with an E. She asks me what the address is. I can't really read it, but I can make out the word river and what looks like the beginning of Nebraska. I ask why, not really understanding what she was getting at, and she tells me her grandpa, my uncle's namesake, lived in Wood River, Nebraska. I took a closer look at the address, and sure enough, it says Wind River. My great-great-grandfather was Einer. It's hard to tell, but it's signed by an Einer. Anyways, my great-grandfather named Kurt Benson, who lived in Wind River, River, Nebraska in 1916 had a father named Einar. I believe this postcard is from my great-great-grandfather to my great-grandfather. 100 years later, I buy it at an antique store. The front of the postcard is a photo of a group of people in a car. Back in that era, it was common to have your personal photos printed onto thick paper so that they could be mailed as postcards. My great-great-grandfather is possibly one of the people pictured. Story number 30. I was at a volleyball camp the summer between elementary school and middle school. One day, I started having sharp but moderate pains in my pelvic area. At first, I thought it was period cramps because the pain came in waves, sort of like contractions, and I knew it wasn't a stomach ache. I mentioned this to my coach at the end of the day, and he said it must just be muscle cramps from the brutal conditioning we had been doing. Seemed reasonable enough, so he gave me some tips, and I did every single one. I went home that night and had no other real pain. 2 days later, the pain comes back, except this time it was a bit sharper and the contractions were lasting longer. I told my coach, and he was frustrated and wrote me off, basically thinking that I was lazy and trying to get out of running and stuff. And by the way, I literally paid to go to this camp with my own money that took a year to save. If I didn't want to be there, I wouldn't be. And I tried harder than I've ever tried in my life to push through the pain and just make it through the day. But the contractions got worse and extremely sharp, unlike anything I'd ever felt in my life. They were longer now too and closer together. With each contraction, the time between them started to disappear, while the pain keeps building and building. And I remember thinking, there's no way this pain could get any worse. But I truly thought I was dying. The other girls started to notice and were concerned, which pissed my coach off even more. He insisted this was cramps from the workout and that I was being a drama queen and distracting the other girls. At this point, I can't even focus on what he is saying, but I knew he was screaming at me. I didn't even try and explain to him my pain because he clearly didn't care, and also because the pain was so bad that I was not able to form sentences. I was seeing black spots and had tunnel vision, I was dizzy, and had this strange sensation that my shorts were too tight and like my waistband was pulling tighter and tighter on top of the new excruciating pain. I interrupted the coach screaming at me and disregarded everything he said and asked him if I could call my mother. He said absolutely not, and that one way or another he would toughen me up. He's running a camp trying to make athletes, not a daycare. So I went back to running laps, and I'm now crying because I felt like I was trapped in hell. I should also mention that we were in a hot and humid gym with no AC in the middle of July in North Carolina, commonly known as Hell Week. The heat index was at least 120 degrees in that gym. During a water break, an absolute angel who was a good 4 years older than me looked at me, held up her cell phone, and put it in my lunchbox. She was a saint, and I'll never forget that. Out of nowhere, I had to puke. I didn't get nauseous. I had no warning. I had to puke now. So I yelled bathroom to him and ran for the locker room because I knew if I said anything more and had my mouth open any longer, he was going to be really mad when I barfed all over this court. Then this freaking dude yells at me, "If you leave this court for the bathroom right now, you will no longer be a member of this camp and will get no refund." So I did the fastest U-turn of all time, grabbed my lunchbox, and ran outside and make it 2 steps onto the sidewalk and projectile vomited all over the sidewalk. I knew something was very, very wrong. I had never puked like that before and was now in so much pain I couldn't breathe. All while I'm pretty sure I was having a panic attack. I take out the girl's phone and call my mom and tell her what's happening, but she's at work 25 minutes away. When you're in that kind of pain, 25 minutes might as well be 25 years. But thank the Lord, my grandmother lived 5 miles away and came to pick me up. I don't remember waiting for her or getting in her car or the drive, but my grandma said I was laying on the pavement in the fetal position with my own puke all around me. She got me to the car and took the phone to my coach to give to the girl and to tell him I will not be returning and will be getting a refund. He began to argue with her, but she walked away mid-sentence. My grandma calls my mother and tells her she is taking me to the ER and that she needs to get off work. Something is wrong. I get there and my doctor thinks my appendix has burst, but is concerned because even that shouldn't cause this much pain. So he orders an X-ray. And then after giving me 2 doses of morphine and somehow still being in pain, I'm at least better enough to speak and explain, and I tell the doctor about the vomiting and the sharpness of the pain, where it hurt specifically, and most telling, the contractions. And after that, it was like something clicked in his head, and he canceled the X-ray and ordered a CT scan instead, and got a urine sample from me. My pee was bright pink, from blood, straight blood in my urine, just what my doctor expected after hearing the extra details. The scan comes back, and I have between 75 to 100 kidney stones in each kidney, and had passed one already in the ER. There was literally a stone in the urine test cup. I got referred to many specialists at the best hospitals in the state, and at each one I was like the circus act, the incredible 11-year-old child with 100 stones in each kidney. I was used as a teaching tool for all of the resident doctors, and it turns out I have a rare kidney disease that affects the acid pH levels of the liquids in my body and causes chronic and reoccurring kidney stones. Fairly rare for adults, extremely rare for little girls. I have many stories over the years of crap I went through, but the day we found out was truly 1 in a million for everyone involved. Everyone was in awe and shock, especially my team of doctors. Oh, and what about the coach? Well, my father went up to the school the next day with a copy of my diagnosis on it. I wasn't there, but knowing my father, he verbally assaulted him with extreme prejudice and called the superintendent. Apparently, I'm far from the first person to have problems with this man, and within a year he was fired from the school due to multiple complaints. Oh, and the fact that he was peeping in the girls' locker room when no one was there but him and the team, and even SA'd a couple of girls. So, he's a dirtbag. And that refund? My dad got that crap back real quick. Story number 31. Kind of a long story, but crazy nonetheless. Was attending the Austin City Limits Musical Festival with some friends, and another friend, let's call her Ashley, and we were arriving late, and said her and some of her friends would like to meet up, grab a spot together for Paul McCartney, the headliner that night. Ashley gives us the heads up that some of her friends are already in the festival, and she gave them my number to coordinate and meet up. Then, about an hour before Sir Paul is set to start, I receive a text message that says, "Hey, this is Matt, Ashley's friend, where are you guys?" And we proceed to message each other, trying to detail landmarks around us, trying to meet up, and they have trouble exactly locating us. So they suggest to meet us by the nearby bathrooms, and he is wearing an anti-social social club shirt. Well, I walk over, and sure enough, I find two bros, one in an ASSC shirt. I introduce myself, and we start exchanging pleasantries, and then they ask how I know Ashley. I explain that we know each other when she lived in Dallas, but she used to be married to a friend of mine, but we still keep in touch, yada yada yada. Then both the bros look a little puzzled, as they never knew she was married or that she ever lived in Dallas. The divorce was fairly newish, so I figured no harm, no foul, as she might have not disclosed that to folks. I'm not fazed, but what does faze me is when they say that they knew her from a Boston area university that I know she did not attend. We finally start cross-referencing last names of Ashley, and sure enough, we are dealing with two different Ashleys here. We then figure out that the guy meant to text a number that was only one number off of my cell phone number, but the odds that two bros from Boston who had traveled to Texas to attend ACL were texting a wrong number with a Dallas area code looking for their friend Ashley, and that this wrong number was actually at said festival and was anticipating correspondence from friends of an Ashley still messes with my head. All three of us stood there, dumbfounded at the universe. We shared a beer, and then we went our separate ways. I hope those bros had fun. Story number 32. It was 2009, a hot summer day. My siblings and I were battling this heat with our favorite pastime, the godsend called a slip and slide. We loved this thing more than we loved each other. For hours, we would slip and slide until I, the weak one, started dying of heat exhaustion and needed to go inside before I had a heat stroke. This day was special though. We were hosting the Slip and Slide Olympics. As each person would slide, we would then time them and race each other for the grand prize of glory that naturally came with winning the Slip and Slide Olympics. It came to my turn to race against the clock and attempt to defeat my brother, who was a master at the arts of slipping and sliding. Sweating, I get into sprinting stance, waiting for the countdown to begin. 3, my sister yells. 2, she stands gripping at mom's phone, anxiously waiting to tap the button. 1, she roared in anticipation to see if I, Kiana, would become the next slip and slide champion. I broke off into a sprint, going as fast as my extra thick 5'5" body would allow. When I got to the edge of the slip and slide, I jump as far as I can, landing on my knees and zooming down the slide at maximum speed, pushing my arms behind me to accelerate myself. I looked like a giant white meatball that had been shot out of a cannon, but I was a giant white meatball who was gonna win. Little did I know, my optimism would be short-lived. Looking at the flower beds I was blasting past, I came to about the middle point of the slip and slide. Then, it happened. My body suddenly came to a halt. I looked forward in confusion confusion, unaware of what waited for me when I looked down. My brother screamed before I even felt the pain. I looked at him to see he was pointing at my legs, and I looked down to see a bloodbath. But I couldn't see a wound, and I couldn't move my bleeding leg. I started to panic and ripped my leg from the ground to see that a sprinkler head that no one knew was there, that had been buried for years and never came up, had decided to reveal itself right when I went over it. This SOB stabbed me in the leg on Slip and Slide Olympics Day. I ripped that hoe out of my leg and just sat there, screaming and staring at a giant hole in my leg. My siblings run inside to tell my parents, who come out and then look at me in shock. And instead of taking me to a hospital, my dad, who has no real medical experience, decided I just needed butterfly stitches. In other words, he put some tape on it in a crisscross pattern. And to prove I was not just being overdramatic, I went to the doctors a few days later, and she was horrified that they didn't take me to the ER and just essentially put a band-aid on it, as it was a very deep wound and just overall a bad cut. So, in conclusion, slip and slides are terrifying, and I haven't been on one since. Story number 33. When I was 16, I had an ingrown toenail fixed. Both sides of it were ingrown quite badly, so I had to have it done in the hospital. The toenail never grew back except as a long, thin strip, and over the years, I had more and more issues. At 24, I had the nail removed, not permanently, because of problems it was causing. I got an infection at the base of the nail after the removal. I had pieces of nail coming out of the infection site, and the bone had been eaten away slightly from the infection. When the infection cleared, there was a hole in my toe that you could see the bone, or touch it with podiatry tools. It eventually healed, so I have a scar, but it is now filled in. After this, I still had a lot of problems and pain in that toe. When the nail grew back, it grew back as a thin nail strip again, but this time the thickness became an issue. The nail was nearly 1 centimeter thick. It could not be cut with nail clippers, so I had a podiatrist who cut my toenails. When I was about 31, the pain when I walked got unbearable. I asked for the nail to be removed permanently, but the doctors refused. They thought it was a fungal infection, even though the scraping never developed a fungal infection in the lab, and I had the nail removed and it grew back exactly the same 2 more times. Then, finally, almost 3 years later, the doctor I saw said he would fully remove the nail permanently. So, the operation started. They opened up my toe to remove the nail bed and discovered something that they had never seen before. My toenail had grown down into my toe and then curled under the bone. The surgery ended up taking much longer than expected because of this, and because the doctor were calling other doctors in to come and look at it. They had never seen it before and said that was why I was having so much pain. Story number 34. Well, it started when I noticed something really funky going on with my vision at the mall. Went to a bunch of eye doctors and they basically told me, it's not your eye that's the problem, it's something behind the eye, i.e. my brain. So my parents and I rush over to the ER to figure out what the heck's going on, and eventually I get an MRI. The next day they come over and tell me I had myself a pediatric stroke at the age of 14, a damn aneurysm in the back left part of my brain, which controls vision apparently. So while I was hospitalized, they ran tons of tests, but didn't find squat. Go figure. The real puzzling thing was that they never found a reason as to why I had it. It's something like a 0.000002% chance to have a stroke at that age, and the doctor said it was even less likely to not find a reason for it. Good news is that you're statistically less likely to have another stroke if they don't find a reason, so yay me. Anyway, I lost the upper right quarter of my vision, but other than that, no real damage. Now, I get the pleasure of stroke jokes since I'm a one-stroke wonder, and I had a stroke of luck and yada yada yada. You get it. Story number 35. Snapping your own neck in the bathroom. This happened to me just last week. I told some of my friends about it, and one of them sent me this thread, so I thought I would share my story. So, normal day, taking a shower, and when I got done, I took a towel and began drying my hair. I mean, what could go wrong? I've been doing this all my life. Well, I somehow managed to push my head to the right too hard so that the top part of my spine made a really unhealthy click sound. I instantly realized how painful that is, and my body started to shake and my skin got really white. I'm pale already, but I'm talking chalk white. I then leaned forwards to get my underpants and put them on. As I did that, I felt the pain in my neck even more. I stood up, looked in the mirror, and screamed for my little brother, who was just playing video games one room away. As I saw into the mirror, I realized I almost couldn't even see myself as my eyesight was fading. I woke up on the bathroom floor, mostly wet, shivering, tremendous pain in my neck, only having on my underpants and a bump above my left eye because I landed on the floor, and my brother was standing next to me, just staring at me with the most bored
bored facial expression you could think of. He said he was standing there for like 2 minutes. He just casually stood there looking at me on the floor. I couldn't look to the left or tilt my head to the left or to the back for a few days, but it just went back to normal eventually. I can't remember blacking out like this ever before, and this made me realize how easy it is to die or seriously get injured. I could have slammed my head onto the toilet if I was just about half a meter away from it. How the hell did this happen to me? I was doing wrestling for a really long time, and my neck is actually relatively strong, but drying my hair with a towel, seriously, is some next level crap. Story number 36. So, my muscles don't work right, and I live in my own little hell, borderline handicapped despite appearing to the general public and most doctors as though that I'm perfectly fine, which causes them to assume that I'm just lazy. I'll spare you most of the medical jargon, but I have a genetic inherited muscle condition called myotonia congenita, and its frequency is unknown, but there are estimates that it has a prevalence between 1 in 10,000 and 1 in a million. There's multiple variants and a lot to know about it, but on top of having been diagnosed with this condition via genetic testing, we cannot know for certain whether my myotonia should be considered dominant or recessive. I have multiple variants on gene CLCN1. One of those variants is believed to be both dominantly and recessively inherited, while the other has never been publicly observed in association with my myotonia. Yay, being the only one on Earth. So it's anyone's guess, really. I personally just say Becker's disease, even though I suspect that it's Thompson's disease. But I very strongly suspect several ancestors of having had it. But they're dead, so can't be tested. Anyway, this disease is really difficult to explain. For the last year or so, I've been trying to put it together in a video demonstrating some of the symptoms it causes and talking about some of the social/emotional toll it takes on me. But I've found that I'm no good at making videos. What the disease effectively does is cause muscles not to relax as quickly as they should. Subject to warm-up phenomenon, I've learned that most people don't understand what I mean by that, so here are some examples. Here, make a fist and squeeze as tightly as you can. Now try to do the opposite action by opening your hand and spreading your fingers. Most people can do that in a fraction of a second. If my hands or fingers haven't been warmed up though, that could take me several seconds. Next, hold up a pen or pencil in proper writing position, with the tip being held in place by the tips of your thumb, index, and middle fingers. Most people can hold that position and write for an extended period of time. But my muscles start to lock up, and holding that position becomes unbearably painful within a minute or two. This was sheer effing hell in elementary school, when the teachers did everything they possibly could to force me to write correctly. Another example, get out of bed after laying down for a while, a few minutes, much less a full night of sleep, and attempt to walk. Most people can. Well, I start to walk and have to catch myself from falling flat on my face almost every morning. I've situated my bed aside a wall so that I can get out of bed and use the wall for walking support for the first 5 feet or so. Continuing, go to an award ceremony and sit in the front row. Get called to the stage to accept an award or deliver a speech or whatever. Stand up. Most people can immediately walk to the stairs, climb the stairs, and then walk across the stage to the podium. For me, it's stand up. Wait 1 second. Take a step. Wait 1 second. Take another step. Wait 1 second. Start ascending the stairs by taking 1 step. Wait 1 second. Take another step. Wait 1 second. Take another step. Wait half a second. Take another step. Wait half a second. Take all of the remaining steps exactly like everyone else would. Walk across the stage like everyone else would. Stand at the podium for 15 seconds, allowing your muscles to cool down, and then repeat the extremely slow warm-up process while trying to get back across the stage to the stairs. Because adrenaline from receiving an award and embarrassment, because obviously both make the effect significantly more pronounced, as do cool temperatures. So God help you if the auditorium's air conditioning is working a little too well. Then, wait for a school bus or just a regular bus at a bus stop. When the bus stops, walk to the bus. Then take the first step, wait a second, take the next step, wait another second. Then take the last step and get frustrated as hell as the driver who is annoyed that you're being so lazy you won't even get on the bus quickly so that they can shut the door to keep the snow out. Then, because your muscles have warmed up, walk the aisle of the bus just as fast as everyone else, proving that you're being intentionally lazy. Another one, stand up. Not walking, but you don't have to be statue still either, but stand up for more than a couple of minutes. Continuously. Feel your calves start to hurt.
Wait another 5 minutes and force yourself to start dancing in place, making motions as though you're walking, even though you're not effectively moving anywhere, because you know that if you don't, you'll be in excruciating pain for hours. Then help friends move furniture just like anyone else would. Then stop to take a sip of soda for 15 seconds. Try to pick up your end of the sofa that's right in front of you and immediately collapse in agony because you forgot that you stopped and cooled down, so your muscles are retaliating, some with spasms and some with weaknesses. Then be a kid, trying to get over the hurdle of swallowing a pill. Realize years later that it's so difficult to get pills down because you didn't realize that you trained yourself to unknowingly dry swallow before drinking liquids or eating food when you were learning how to eat as a child, and thus you didn't know that you need to do the same thing before popping a pill. Finally, walk down a street in Berlin in winter. The cold adds to difficulty. Try to keep up with a friend who walks faster than you. Out of shape adds to the difficulty. And your friend who is otherwise upset with you. The stress adding to the difficulty. And be afraid that he's going to abandon you in a city that you don't know when you're depending on him. Fear and adrenaline adding to the difficulty. And just keep walking, even though your muscles are screaming louder than they ever have before. Even though everyone long ago stopped caring that you couldn't keep up. Even though it feels like you're going to die. Because you don't know that myotonia congenita exists. Much less that you're the 1 in a million who has it. And it's why literally everything seems so incredibly much more difficult for you than everyone else. I apologize for turning this post into a bit of a rant. I really need to come up with some video document style that I can just send to people that adequately conveys this crappy condition.
Story number 37. I was out late drinking beer with friends at a bar, and I was feeling euphoric and super generous. My friends eventually leave and I'm lonely, so I started chatting up randos outside the bar. I get super talkative after a few drinks. Well, I ended up giving all of my money to some homeless guys and talked with them for a while about politics and their life stories. Finally, I decided to go home and knock the F out. All before I give away my code or something else stupid that my drunkenly overgenerous self would do. But then I saw this twink, maybe 27 years old, in tears. He was walking around aimlessly with tears pouring down his cheeks and snot running from his nose. I stopped to give him a tissue. I carry them around because you never know when you or someone else will need one, and I asked him if he was okay. He broke down, clung to me, and started sobbing, which is a weird thing to do to a complete stranger, but I can tell he's really drunk and just needs a little help. I've been there. After crying into my shoulder for a minute, he explained that he managed to lose his phone and wallet while also forgetting where his hotel was. He had been walking around drunkenly for hours in the cold with no code or anything. So I take pity on him and look up his hotel on my phone, and it's literally right around the corner. I kinda went into mother hen mode and lead this drunk-ass twink to his hotel. Now, I am lower middle class, and this hotel lobby just screamed rich. Fireplaces, many uniformed attendants, beautiful furniture, classy lighting. Later I looked it up, and one night there costs $500 effing dollars. Oh my effing god. Well, the twink immediately starts complaining to the staff about how he lost his wallet, and how he's wandering around outside for hours in a t-shirt trying to find the hotel. He's whining and pouting and obviously inebriated, and I'm kinda mortified because I hate wasting employees' time with bullcrap. And he wasn't exactly being nice or considerate to them either, but these hotel workers knew how to deal with the ultra-rich, i.e. ultra-entitled, and they just nodded and told him exactly what he wanted to hear. I was impressed by the staff's incredibly respectful and professional response to being whined at by a drunken idiot who was just psycho-babbling at this point. So by now, I had done my job. He had found the hotel, and I was gonna leave, but to my surprise, he invited me up to his room. I was still buzzed and still kinda worried about this dumbass drunk rich twink, so I shepherded his stumbling ass upstairs to his room, and oh my god, you guys, his effing room. Like, I felt like Shane Dawson reacting to Jeffree Star's mansion. There were super high ceilings, a huge bed, gorgeous floor-to-ceiling windows, and an effing plate of arranged berries. Let me repeat, a casual plate of arranged berries. We immediately started eating the berries and started chatting, aka I listened to him complain about this evening more, and apparently this dumb twink had taken his friend's private effing jet to get to New York, where he then got really drunk in a helicopter ride and started blacking out. Apparently, his friends just left him, or he wandered off. The details were fuzzy. We finished all the raspberries, and then he started taking off his clothes. I was kinda like, okay. This is weird as hell, but I'm gay and I'm not entirely opposed to the situation. He's in his underwear and decides to draw a bath. And I am like trying to give him his privacy, but he doesn't care at all.
and he's not bad to look at either. Anyway, he manages to find his backup phone, which apparently he has because losing his wallet and phone are common occurrences for him. What an effing mess. So, he FaceTimes his friends and summons an Uber. I've been forcing him to drink water, and I can tell he's getting more coherent. Then, this MF pulls out some Versace bag totally filled with stacks on stacks of $100 bills. I had never seen that many bills before, and I'm totally awestruck. I'm gooped. I'm gagged as he counts out $1,000. He brags about how expensive the bag was, something stupid like $5,000, effing rich people. And then he hands me $1,000 and says, "Thank you for helping me out tonight." And I am freaking shook. My wig snatched, my bussy quivering, my pocket full of $100 bills. I've never been paid this much at once before, and I honestly wasn't expecting it at all. But did I complain? Hell no. Girl, you know I took that. So anyway, we go to the club that his friends are at, and I feel like a street urchin amongst models. Everyone is white, thin, tall, and incredibly well dressed, and they are the queer upper 1%, and I feel woefully underdressed. Mind you, I'm lugging around my huge puffy coat, backpack, and my hair's an effing mess. But the twink introduces me to his friends, and they praise me and buy me drinks with their endless wallets full of cash. All in all, I had a wild, magical night, and ended up going home with a hot guy who might have given me herpes, and I'll have to go get tested, but the chances are apparently pretty slim. So yeah, that was my last night. I'm $1,000 richer now, and I might believe in karma. Like after I was generous with the homeless dudes, this dumbass, drunk-ass, ultra-rich twink ended up being super generous with me. What goes around comes around, my dudes.
So, this was an amazing story. I've read a lot of stories, and I think this is the first time that I've ever heard twinks being mentioned in a story that I've read, and Bussy and Shane Dawson. I remember the old Shane Dawson, and then there was the middle Shane Dawson, and the new Shane Dawson, and I don't know where he's at now. But anyway, this was a lot of firsts for me as a narrator, so very fun story. Anyway, let's continue. Story number 38. Earlier this year, my gastroenterologist decided he wanted to treat H. pylori that I have, which is typically non-symptomatic and majority of the world has, and this is due to other GI issues. And he started me on tetraglycine antibiotic regimen to treat it. Within the first day of taking the medication, I was calling the nurse to report a weird feeling and being kind of out of it. I called her every following day, very concerned about the meds, but they assured me that I should continue taking them since I can't stop mid-antibiotic. I took the meds for 5 days, and by day 5, I had developed a splitting migraine, was throwing up quite a bit. When I woke up with a migraine the next day, I knew something was really wrong. I could hear a whooshing in my head/ears that wasn't on time with my heartbeat. I could hardly open my eyes due to photosensitivity, and my left eye had abnormal blurry spots. And then I began having these rapid mood swings that didn't even make sense to me. I went to an urgent care center and the doctor acted like I was crazy and grabbed my head and told me I just had a tension headache. He rotated my occipital bones in my skull and sent me home. I decided to halt the meds on my own account because I really strongly felt they might be the culprit of these issues. Well, I woke up with the same whooshing and migraine for a third day and ended up making the decision to go with my dad when he was going for his general vision checkup and had them take a look at my eyes. Luckily, they took me seriously and did an extra retinal scan that showed I had papilledema, swollen optic nerves, in both eyes. I went in for an MRI the next day where they confirmed that I had increased intracranial pressure due to an increased presence of spinal fluid on my brain. It had swollen up enough that I now have issues with my pituitary functioning, which I am still dealing with months down the line. I've read dozens of studies and case studies at this time, and although I can find reports of people having intracranial swelling, it is always after they are taking the meds for months and then report symptoms. I am a chronic worrier, so initially when my moods started going all over the place and I was having these weird feelings, I felt like I was crazy or somehow inventing this situation for myself. It turns out I'm incredibly in tune with my body and when things are wrong. Now, 4 months down the road, I still hear that whooshing, which is a big sign of too much pressure in your head, but luckily, after a cortisol shot, lots of sumatriptan, and a 2-week-long migraine, where the migraine itself subsided, making the rest of the symptoms much more manageable. Story number 39. Once, I caught a hummingbird. I'm a master of patience and interacting with wild animals, bunnies, birds, cats, etc. Only the small ones, though. Anyway, this poor hummingbird got caught in our garage and was flirting about scared. I tried to use a stick to get it out to go out the door, but I couldn't figure it out. So I used that same stick and coaxed the small bird to come down. It flew down in front of me once, but I wasn't ready. I tried again, and it came down once more. I lightning quick snatched it up and grabbed the hummingbird. Quickly, I checked to to see if I had heard it because it was impossible to time it so I wouldn't get its wings, but the bird was fine. Now I'm like super excited. I've caught a hummingbird with my bare hands. I gently hold the hummingbird and take a picture for proof. Unfortunately, that picture lies in the camera of my grandparents, who live on the East Coast. And I now live in Utah, so don't expect pictures for a while. Anyway, I got to show my sister, who is the only other person home, and after looking at the hummingbird, I decide that it is a ruby-throated hummingbird, copper feathers on its neck and green shiny ones on its back. A few fell off when I brought it inside, and I collected them, but I lost those showing off at school, unfortunately. Man, I was bad at keeping stuff as a kid. Anyway, I eventually brought it outside and let it go. It sat on my hand for a second before flying free and fluttered around our pear tree a bit before flying off. Most impressive catch I have ever made. And I did a good deed too. Story number 40. Well, this is my first post ever. Not sure if it's even one in a million, but I always think it's a cool story to share. I've been a resident of Detroit for 2 years now and grew up in the surrounding metropolitan area. I've always been fascinated by the Art Deco architecture of the old buildings throughout the city. Last year, Ford Motor Company announced that they would be buying and renovating the old Michigan Central Station and turning it into a new headquarters for their autonomous and electric vehicle campus. To me, this is the most extravagant building throughout the city and has been sitting there rotting since the late 80s. It has been the poster child for urban decay throughout the US, and the announcement came as a miracle to those who have been living in the city. Anyway, Ford decided to host an event celebrating their announcement and offered a tour of the inside of the building to selected employees from the company. This building has been gated off for years, and gaining access to the inside came with great risk. Knowing that I had a friend who shared a similar enthusiasm for Detroit's architecture and who also worked for Ford, I decided to reach out to him and ask if I could join in on the tour. So I drove out to the Ford campus and pretended to be an employee for the day, then proceeded to sneak onto the bus that was taking employees to the new site and proceeded to go on the tour. The last stop of the tour was in the grand atrium of the building. It was epic. I mean, after rotting and decay, to imagine that this used to be the first thing people saw when they would arrive in the city during its heyday was truly jaw-dropping, an ode to the intricacy of design in the past. I stood there with my phone out, taking a video, still pretending to be an employee, when all of a sudden, I felt a tap on my shoulder and someone say in my ear, "What do you think?" I turn around, and it was Bill Ford speaking to me. Bill Ford, the chairman of Ford Motor Company and the descendant of Henry Ford. I looked at him in disbelief, only to say to him, "Mr. Ford?" And in the blink of an eye, we were smothered by cameras and actual employees. I couldn't believe it. Not only was I able to sneak into this tour, but I was also the first person to be approached by Bill Ford himself. So, to the city of Detroit and its resilient people, your day will come, and I hope to not only be by your side, but to help shape the future of this city. Story number 41. The year was 2004. The elementary school I went to held a carnival annually. The main attraction of the carnival was the raffle, where kids would urge their parents to buy hundreds of tickets so they could gamble on winning all sorts of expensive toys like the Nintendo Wii or the hottest new Lego set. The main attraction of the raffle in 2004 was the brand new state-of-the-art iPod Classic. Remember the chunky one with the scroll wheel, 2 colors on the display, and a whopping storage size of 16 gigabytes? At the time, it was the hottest item in the raffle. Some of the kids from wealthier families put up to 100 tickets in the iPod raffle box. My parents, not being the materialistic type, bought me 10 tickets. So I put 3 tickets in the iPod box and crossed my fingers. Sure enough, I was the winner that year. The odds were roughly 1 in 1,000, but that's not where the story ends. The following year, I heard that the new iPod mini would be up for raffle. I actually had a plan for what to do with the second one the day before the carnival. I decided that if I won another one, I would give it to my brother. The rich kids doubled down with raffle tickets on the iPod, and I once again put in just 3 tickets. Needless to say, I thought it was a joke when they drew my name again. Still, one of the most ridiculously lucky experiences in my life. My 4th grade teacher joked to my parents that she wanted to take me to Vegas. I'm not much of a gambler now, though. So, 2 1 in 1,000 situations equals a 1 in a million situation. So, I'm pretty sure this fits here. Story number 42. Normally, you inherit approximately 25% of your DNA from each grandparent. That ends up being around 1,800 centimorgans from each of your 4 grandparents. This number can vary by a couple hundred in either direction. So my daughter did an ancestry DNA test, and so did her father's entire family, and everything checks out. Nothing weird. Only, my daughter got 3,000-ish cm from her paternal grandpa, and only 600-ish from her paternal grandma. Uploaded everyone into GEDmatch to compare and check for errors or incest or whatever, anything to explain it. Had genealogists and geneticists look into it too. Everything checks out. It is a super extreme outlier situation. A couple of guys in a Facebook group I joined to learned more, did the math, and estimated that there's like a 1 in 4 million chance of that happening. In my Google searches, I can't find record of it ever happening to anyone who's ever tested. For perspective, my daughter shares twice as much DNA with her grandpa than she does with her half-sister. She also shares more DNA with her cousin than she does with her grandmother. It has a snowball effect too. She shares an abnormal amount of DNA with relatives of her grandparents. So, in the future generations, if someone were to try to solve a DNA mystery, they'd be completely thrown off by these wild numbers. For example, when passing down genes to her own child, her child would likely share 1500 cm with my daughter's grandpa, which is in the range for grandparents, not great-grandparents as would be the case, and she would only pass down 300 from her grandma, which is out of range for great-grandma. Story number 43. Not sure of the odds, but I never self-pleasured, nor had sex, nor had a girlfriend until I started self-pleasuring around age 28. Yes, it is odd I have high-functioning Asperger's. By grave misfortune at the age of 26, I was wrongfully accused of SA on a campus. This was a simple instance of asking and obtaining permission to feel a person's garment, their pants, and this was an autistic sensory detail. Since it happened on a campus, though, the laws of the regular world did not apply. So, as long as a woman was made unhappy, the offender would be bashed crap into the ground. I was forced to spend 8 hellish months in a jail on a $50,000 cash bond, which I obviously couldn't afford. Since I was in such dire shock of my circumstances and confounded of the betrayal of what occurred, I couldn't even tell the defense attorney my side of the story and what took place after. After recognizing signs of serious medical complications, news of significant neglect and physical abuse occurring to my god/grandmother after being transported to a nursing care center, and one of the most incompetent and moronic attorneys verified in the entire area, I was forced into a plea conviction. My subconscious conditioning from participation in the Catholic services further washed away my competency. I am now fighting like hell to overturn it, but the damage has already been inflicted. The resulting sentence was time served, 5 years of SAing torture probation, and sex offender registration. I felt that I was psychologically slammed on the back of my head with the time. At now 31 years old, I feel sexually deflated. My career prospects are ruined. I hardly have any experience, and I have only my mother for support. Everybody else in the family vanished or died. I only wonder if anybody can relate. Most days I'm wanting to self-unalive. It was worst after the appointed appellate attorney only attacked me with other potential victims as a means of not challenging the plea. She had her head up her ass for being friends with the prosecutor. I don't see myself living for too much longer. Maybe 2-3 years tops. Story number 44. I was born on Leap Day, February 29th, which also happened to be my uncle's birthday. Having 2 leap birthdays in consecutive generations is super rare by itself, but we hit the trifecta when my second child was also born on Leap Day. Not scheduled or induced, she came on her own. So we have people in 3 consecutive generations who all share the same birthday, which only occurs once every 4 years. Not sure of the probability or numbers behind the likeliness of this, but if anyone is willing to do the math at all and let me know, I would be super grateful. Also, a huge bonus to this story, I also conceived my daughter while using an IUD with 99.9% effectiveness. The IUD was still perfectly in place when the doctor removed it and appeared to be functioning normally. After a few tests, we learned that the baby was perfectly healthy and had none of the abnormalities or complications that we were told to expect. All of the doctors and nurses were shocked and kept saying how they had never heard of a situation like ours. The OB kept referring to me as the 0.001%. Months later, when she was born a month early, perfectly healthy on Leap Day, it was more obvious she was destined to be ours. She's now the strong, smart, kind little sister our family needed, and a huge piece of my heart, and the 3rd consecutive generation in our family with Leap Day birthday. Every time I think about this, I can't get over how crazy it is. So, I always try to share relevant personal stories if I have any. I am not so lucky, so I don't have any personal stories, but I did have a manager who had a set of twins, then he had another set of twins, and then he comes into work one day and he's talking to the assistant store manager, and my boss, the manager, he looks like he's seen a ghost, and he's like, "What's going on?" And he says, my wife's pregnant again. And he says, "Congratulations." And he says, "Well, we're having twins for a 3rd time." So the statistical anomaly of that happening 3 times, let alone 2, is just absolutely insane. And also, at the same job, we had a regular customer. He was a gay, black, British ginger. That is a rare person find. I'm just like, cool guy, great guy. I'm just saying, I've never met anyone like him, and I probably never will again. Anyway, next story. Story number 45. I was having terrible abdominal pain around my gallbladder, on and off for about a year. I had an ultrasound and workup, and they didn't see any stones or inflammation, so the doctor figured it was reflux and told me
me to watch certain foods and stuff. Well, it started to act up one week, and I was eating antacids like candy. One particular night, I hurt so bad I couldn't even lay down flat. I just started a new job, and I didn't have any sick time yet, so I dragged myself out of bed and drove an hour to my job. My boss looks at me and he says, "You need to go down to employee health. You look like death." And the nurse takes my temperature. It is normal, but I am pale gray and I hurt so bad. She is like, "I think it's your gallbladder, maybe an impacted stone?" So my boss sends me home. I can't get into my doctor till 11 a.m., so I try to rest. My mom ends up driving me to the doctor because at this point, I am still in so much pain, I can't even drive anymore. We get to my doctor and she tries to get me to lay down, and I can't. It hurts so much. She feels around where my appendix is. No problem. Still, I have no fever. She says, "Even though you have no fever and no tenderness where your appendix is, I am still going to send you to the ER for a scan. It's either your gallbladder or appendix." So, my mom drives me 40 minutes to the hospital to the ER. My doctor called ahead so we could get right in, thankfully. They bring me back for an ultrasound, no stones. And I am in tears at this point. The pain is so bad. They do blood counts. They are slightly elevated, so they bring me to CT. My appendix lights up the eastern shore. It is so inflamed, and it looks like it might be slightly perforated by this point. So they are suddenly rushing me back to the OR to get it out before it ruptures. They decide they can't do it laparoscopic because it is so inflamed, they need to do it open. So they knock me out and start to cut open where my appendix should be. But, not there. Cut up a little more. Nope, not there. Kept cutting up until where they get to my gallbladder is, and find that my appendix is wrapped around my gallbladder. And this would be why I was having gallbladder problems and pain for a year, but nothing was actually wrong with my gallbladder. The doctor said I had acute chronic necrotic appendicitis. He said he has never seen or heard of it. And after when I told my Nana, she said, "Your great Nana's appendix was wrapped around her gallbladder like that as well." Seems like it runs in the family. Story number 46. For the U.S. federal finance aid, I was assigned the ID number 1776. I've since changed it as it was weirding me out. I started feeling like I was assigned this number because I was a test case for the government. I know that's highly unlikely, but every time I had to give the number, it would raise eyebrows. Then, I got quite high scores on my state standardized test to the point where I won a scholarship that no one else in my school did. Higher scores than the valedictorian, as well as the kid everyone thought was a genius in my class, and near highest in the state. It was the only test I ever got preparation for out of pure force because my school changed its curriculum to prepare for this test. It was a surprise to my teachers and myself. I did it again with other tests and did really well on my ACT, even though I did no prep for the ACT. I never paid attention in any class. So I got this weird feeling because I had these surprise scores. I got this number to see how federal funding helped people who tested well. But I also have a disability that went undiagnosed for a long time, so I felt like a failure anytime I looked at that ID number and was struggling with transitioning into adulthood as I learned to monitor my disability. Basically, being given a random-ass number made me paranoid, narcissistic, and gave me a minor complex. Story number 47. I found the love of my damn life who is absolutely perfect for and to me in every way. Right here on Reddit, of all places. Just picture what you think an ideal relationship would be like, then multiply that exponentially. We're almost exactly 4 months apart by birth, share the same hobbies, interests, aesthetics, political views, religious views, morals, ethics, passions, libidos, relationship needs, love languages. I'm dead serious. You effing name it and we match completely. We just celebrated our first year anniversary the other day, and we've never had a single argument. We've never fought. We've shared 5 in-person visits. We're currently long distance, and not once has anything been less than absolutely perfect. Perfection may not exist, but perfection for me does. And how many people can truly say they've found their soulmate or someone they can treasure as much as what I've stumbled upon? Or rather, what stumbled upon me when I posted from a throwaway account to an obscure subreddit, Forever Alone Dating, and I did so one evening. What makes it even more miraculous is that my post at the time was more of a half-hearted attempt at anything than something actually trying too much, and he was actually a fair bit buzzed at the time and about ready to pass out that night and scrolled through 3+ pages of posts to find mine. And of 3 chosen, he chose to message me. On top of this, my post was a week old at the time, and I just happened to log back in to find his message. If he had fallen asleep, or if I had let proverbial sleeping dogs lie and not logged back in a week later on a whim, we would have never met. He's so much more to me than 1 in a million, but I think it's befitting. I'm very blessed. Story number 48. I have several non-life-threatening health problems, and while they are not 1 in a million rare, in combination are rare. And the common pattern is that there is no cure for any of them. Modern medicine just says, yeah, we don't know what causes it and how to cure it. So, I have Hashimoto's disease, started at 23 years old, where my immune system rejects my thyroid gland and attacks it. No cure, just daily thyroid hormones. My thyroid function will continue to deteriorate. Then, I have alopecia areata, started at 20 years old, a disease where my immune system attacks my hair follicles, leaving me completely bald all over my body. No hair, beard, eyebrows, eyelashes, no hair anywhere. No cure available, no treatment available. It is just what it is. Then I have pulsatile tinnitus in one ear where I basically hear my blood pumping through like a whooshing sound all day every day, which is very annoying. Started at 32 years old, no cure, no treatment, just what it is. Then I have IBS. Basically, my bowels don't work right, and doctors eliminated all possible systemic causes and came up empty. So the diagnosis means we don't know what is wrong with you. Then I have angina duodenum, and the root cause is unknown. I stopped enjoying things that normal adults like, but I'm not depressed. I just have muted emotions. I don't feel happy about anything. I cut contact with friends because I don't really like spending time with anyone. Yet, I don't feel lonely. I don't get anything from watching the sunset. I don't have a desire to travel. No desire to experience new things. I eat to be not hungry. No desire to do anything really. But I'm not unhappy or depressed. I'm just content. It's just weird. You won $1 billion. That's cool. Your mother died. That's sad. Tried 5 different doctors and tried several medications, and none of them helped. Most made it worse. Made me depressed temporarily. Then I have unexplained painful pins and needle sensations all over my body when I get healed. People with MS disease have this, but I am cleared for MS. They don't know what causes it. And there's more stuff. Whenever I have a health problem and go to the doctor, I am first met with confusion, then tests, then more tests, then diagnoses, then retraction of diagnoses, then other diagnoses. And we don't know what causes it, and there is no cure. It has become a common trope in my life. Story number 49. There have been probably a few freak occurrences in my life that I could label as 1 in a million, but it's easier to talk about physical conditions as most Redditors are doing. When I was 4, I got into a little bit of trouble. A little accident per se, which resulted in having a little stick being lodged into my eye. The optic nerve was completely severed, signaling the end of sight in my left eye. The only thing that pisses me off, by the way, is that I didn't even get a cool scar from it. Either way, despite the unusuality of 4-year-olds getting into major accidents, the big bump came after I had a small operation to try and fix any problems. I was diagnosed with a condition called sympathetic ophthalmia, which is a really confusing condition, basically where your right tends to have a sort of connected relationship with the left, where it tries to heal if it gets injured, God knows how. However, because the body is not very good at healing nerve damage, it often ends up basically injuring itself, trying to make the other one better. Pretty much, you lose one eye, and the other gets depressed and dies with it. Not great, because being blind can be kinda inconvenient. Anyways, the condition itself is epidemiologically present in roughly 0.01% of people who have serious eye injuries in only one eye. About 1 in 10,000 in a very specific group. Wouldn't be surprised if that already adds up to about 1 in a million. Certainly don't see 1% of the population with one eye, but then the even weirder part comes after that. You see, sympathetic ophthalmia is usually a pretty darn serious issue because there's a world of difference between one eye and no eyes, and that's exactly what that leads to. Usually, the only way to deal with this is either by enucleation, taking out the injured eye completely, which means there's no connection left between the two naturally, or evisceration, which means just taking out most of it. Story number 50. Well, it's not that comparable to other crazy stories here, but this is probably the luckiest I've ever been. We were camping along a river in South Africa in the middle of nowhere. The nearest hospital was miles away, and the campsite was pretty simple with no real facilities. So, a few kids and I decided to go kayaking. We pushed the boat into the water from the bank, and I head up the bank to get some paddles, and what do I see lying on the ground all curled up? A damn puff adder. Now, this snake is probably the most dangerous snake in South Africa because of its tendency to attack people without much caution. It's also crazy venomous. So, I freeze, and then suddenly, I see one of the little girls about to walk into it. I basically dive at her to stop her, and luckily I saw the snake in time and I was able to point it out to the child. We back away slowly and tell the adults about it. They come over and move it far from the camp in a bucket. It's only afterwards that I realized how lucky I got. You see, the snake was cooling off underneath the boat. That means my feet were right next to it at some point.
and this puff adder, the most aggressive snake in South Africa, decided for whatever reason not to bite me. Thank you, snake boy, for making me not lose a leg that day. Story number 51. Mom was unwell before she was pregnant with me. Abdominal issues unrelated to pregnancy, and they ended up doing basic investigative surgery. Didn't see anything at a basic level. This was the early 80s. The issues changed, but she didn't feel any better. So they decided to dig around again, this time slicing her open and extracting her intestines to check her uterus and below. Now, of course, all through this process, they asked if she was potentially pregnant. Nope, had a surgery a few weeks ago. Checks came back neutral, blah, 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 blah. Then the surgeon got past my mom's guts, and then, oh crap, that's a pregnant uterus, and almost nearly literally threw her guts back in her and stitched her up, telling her she was a few weeks pregnant. All they could deduct was that my mom was ectopic at the time of her first surgery, which is why she didn't have normal symptoms or that they could see much. The initial surgery dislodged me, yes, me, and I reattached properly in her uterus, and the following symptoms were normal pregnancy related. The second surgery revealed as much, and here I am. Story number 52. In university, I started having major headaches. I felt like my head was going to explode from pressure. I went to the doctor, and they said it was just migraines from stress as I was in exams right then. Well, the semester ends and my headaches are still killing me, and I wake up with double vision and I cannot move my right eye at all, and I was vomiting everywhere. I was admitted to the hospital for 12 days and had multiple lumbar punctures performed and diagnosed with rare condition idiopathic intracranial hypertension, which is the cerebrospinal fluid pressure within the skull being too high. A regular pressure is around 10 to 15, and mine was 47. It was literally causing the nerves in my eyes to swell, and I almost went blind. I had double vision for over a month and did permanently lose some of my peripheral vision. I had 24/7 headaches for 2 years and still take 16 pills a day for it 6 years later. At 21, I also had a pulmonary embolism after surgery, which made me the youngest person that the hospital ever had treated for it. And just because my 20s need to end on a great note, I'm having my gallbladder taken out in 3 weeks. 2 weeks before I turn 30, which is quite young to need the surgery. Story number 53. I shattered my spine in a motorcycle accident several years ago. The doctors came into the ER with my x-rays preparing to tell my family and me that I would never walk again. Out of habit, they checked my toes before telling us this and I could move them. They were confused and went back to make sure that they had the correct x-rays. They did, and then they came in and told us that I had a burst fracture and there were a lot of shards of bone around my spinal column like grenade shrapnel. They needed to operate, but doing so would cause some of the shards to move and would sever my spinal column. The surgery took several hours with 3 doctors, but I came out okay. Then they told me I'd be bedridden for a month, need a walker for 6 months to a year, and may never achieve normal mobility. I was bedridden for 2 weeks, used a walker for a month, and had normal mobility within 3 months. Then there was other crazy miracle stuff from then. I was found about 250 feet away from the road and had landed on a fire ant mound the size of a twin bed. I was covered in terrible ant bites, but it had acted like a cushion and prevented me from getting hurt much worse than if I had landed 2 feet in any other direction. I called 911 when I regained consciousness, but couldn't tell them where I was due to shock. This was pre-GPS enabled cell phones. And then a man with sunglasses appeared above me, told me he was an off-duty cop, told the dispatcher where to send the ambulance, and left. If you know anything about first responders training, he was not supposed to leave until they arrived. Well, less than 2 minutes later, an ambulance shows up, record timing, and an officer swings by to clarify all of the details of the accident. They're particularly interested in the off-duty officer because none of their off-duty officers said they were there that day. So they check the 911 tapes, and they can't find the 911 tapes. As far as they're concerned, an ambulance got a call from dispatch that never happened, told to go there from a person who didn't exist on a call that was never made, to help me survive an injury that should have killed or paralyzed me. My family and I believe the cop was an angel, but believe what you will, still a crazy experience. The other 1 in a million thing to happen to me is finding my wife. I'm not going to share the whole story here, but for 2 people who are a perfect match to find each other after being raised in different continents, cultures, and languages was a miracle. I'm American and she's Colombian. If I had gotten into my first college pick, we wouldn't have met. If I hadn't worked at a summer camp before college, we wouldn't have met. If I hadn't had a supernatural experience there calling me to go to Colombia, we wouldn't have met. If I hadn't gone to the church I did later, we wouldn't have met. If my pastor hadn't come from Puerto Rico to be a pastor there, we wouldn't have met. If he hadn't invited me to join him to a conference in Colombia, we wouldn't have met. If my friend hadn't persuaded me to go, we would not have met. If I hadn't raised the money needed for the trip, we wouldn't have met. If I hadn't gone on a date with another girl, no less, to the movies while there, we would not have met. If that other girl and I had not broken up, we wouldn't have started talking online. If she hadn't spent a semester in the US learning English several years before, we couldn't have talked, etc., etc. So many small things that could have worked out differently, and I wouldn't be married to my best friend. Thank God for all of them. Story number 54. Probably not one in a million, but 10 years ago when I was a wee lad, I was with my family on a road trip. My parents ended up taking a wrong turn and getting lost. They found a mall though, and everyone decided that we'd go inside, eat lunch, and figure out where we were. We went to the food court, and right next to it there was an arcade machine that I had never seen before. It was called Stackers. I figured it was just another random game though, and didn't think much of it at the time. So my family and I all split up to all of the different fast food places to pick up our food, and by coincidence, I arrived back at our table with my first lunch and started eating. While I was waiting for everyone else, this random middle-aged lady walked up to that Stackers machine and started playing. With nothing else to do, I watched from afar. I remember being absolutely amazed at how good she was. Every single attempt she made on the machine, she got to the final level before the major prize. At the time, I didn't know about how rigged those machines were, so I was just blown away. I remember thinking to myself, there's no way I'll ever be that good. And the woman played one last round and again, and failed on the last level. She would have played again, but her husband showed up, seemingly irritated at seeing his wife blowing up a bunch of money on a video game, and had to physically drag her away from the machine. She kicked up a fuss the whole way, but they had left the food court. Still waiting for my family, I looked down at the spare change I had in my hand after buying lunch, and found enough there for exactly one round at the game. Surely my parents wouldn't mind, I thought to myself. They probably wouldn't even notice that I spent their spare change on the game, and I'd be back before they even realized. Determined, I stood up, walked over to the machine, put in all the money I had left, and played my first ever Stackers game. The PSP I won that day is in my hands right now, 10 years later as I write this. I can't even imagine how my childhood would have turned out without the hundreds of hours I spent on that thing over the years. And it had all come down to a bunch of coincidences. If my parents hadn't gotten lost, if we didn't find the mall, if that lady's husband showed up 30 seconds later, if the line at A&W had been longer. Crazy how life works sometimes. And I have never lost a Stackers game. Story number 55. I learned that I was comprehensively poisoned in 2018, and by that point, I had lost 25 pounds in under 6 months, was below 80 pounds and dropping. My doctor ordered some supportive therapies, but said there was nothing else they can do. In the next 3 months, I lost another 57 pounds. In under a year, I lost my vision almost entirely, my hair fell out, my balance had disappeared, my ability to process thoughts had diminished to almost nothing, my skin erupted in lesions, my head, teeth, joints, bones, kidneys, chest constantly felt like someone had poured acid in them. Skin fell off the bottoms of my feet and hands, my stomach had stopped digesting food, my facial expressions and speech were paralyzed, and I still mostly am, entirely recognizable to even my family. My entire body continued to deteriorate, dropping below 50 pounds at the lowest, and my life was literally an hour-to-hour job for months. By November 2018, my weight and condition had started to improve. In December 2018, my organs, including my kidneys, started to work again. As of February 2019, I'm 90 pounds and still processing that I survived something statistically impossible, and that I was absolutely not intended to. And then, as of early January 2019, I'm participating in the criminal justice system as an attempted murder victim in an open criminal investigation. Story number 56. I had a bunch of lung problems when I was a baby. Constant lung infections and all. Doctors could not figure out what was causing it, and when I was in intense case unit, they told my parents to mentally prepare to lose me. Somehow, though, I ended up pulling through and lived like normal. Around 12, I started having lung problems again, so I'm diagnosed with asthma. At 17, I have to rush to the ER because it hurts to breathe. They diagnose me with pleuritis and send me on my way. They keep doing follow-up checkups because they didn't know what caused it. Turns out, I had a birth defect, a fistula between my trachea and my esophagus. So essentially a portion of everything I consumed went directly into my lungs. The doctors had no idea how I was alive. This was at 21 years old now. Had a surgery, got it fixed. Turns out the fistula was at an angle and therefore only a small portion of stuff I consumed managed to actually get into my lungs. The doctor said had it not been for this, I would have died years ago. Had to go to multiple doctors until I finally found one that was comfortable doing the surgery on an adult. And it almost never happened. Apparently, this is fairly common in babies, but I was born in a
third world country where they didn't have the technology to detect it back in the 90s. Turns out I never had asthma after all. Thankfully, I have never been a smoker. Story number 57. When I was around 3 years old, this weird symptom started. I would wake up screaming and crying in pain that my legs hurt, and sometimes I couldn't even walk. Then, the next day, the pain would magically disappear, and I was back to walking and running around like normal. This would go on for a few months until it became more persistent. My parents started bringing me to doctors to see what was going on. They brought me to like 6 or 7 doctors. Some took MRIs of my legs, and none of them had a definitive answer. Apparently, a common question from the docs was, "Are you sure he's not faking it?" And my parents would reply, "What the hell? No, he's 3 years old. Why would he do that?" This went on for months. No doctor had an answer. And then finally, one children's pediatric doctor lit up like a light bulb. "I know exactly what it is," he said. "He has Legg-Perthes disease. Very rare and mostly males that get it. Basically, this means that the ball joints of my hip bone were losing blood flow and starting to disintegrate. So when I would go to walk, putting pressure on the rotting pelvis joints would cause me extreme agony." Then they began therapy. And if you've ever seen Forrest Gump with his leg braces, that is exactly what I wore for about 4 years until my hips healed up. The doctor said we were lucky. If I went untreated for about 1 or 2 more months, I would have lost all function in both legs and be a paraplegic right now. Story number 58. Normally, I don't share this kind of stuff, but I've literally had countless people tell me I'm different because of my story. Maybe someone will read this and share it with someone in a similar situation, and it will give them hope. I became a teen parent at the age of 18 with a girl, my age, who had already had a 2-year-old. My son arrived only 15 months after I graduated high school. I was still a young student, and in the time since then, I've worked a full-time job and gone to college full-time while doing my best to be a father as well. I haven't had a day of unemployment since leaving high school, and a few of those early entry-level jobs sucked the life out of me, but I never let myself quit. My weeks in the first few years consisted of working 40 to 60 hours a week, taking as much overtime as I could, and I was only making $8 an hour, and the sole provider of a family of 4, living on our own, income-based housing. Between work shifts, I would do my best to schedule a full course load. I almost always had 12-plus credit hours each semester, 4 classes, and somehow I managed to get all my coursework done in between. We couldn't afford internet, so I would often drive to a McDonald's or other fast food place for the Wi-Fi after the college library was closed. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. My son is now 10 years old, and I'm the proud recipient of an MBA degree from a pretty good school. I bought my first home in 2013, made some strategic improvements with my savings, and flipped it. Now, I live in my dream home. I have a white-collar job at a company I love, doing work that I enjoy. I coach my son's wrestling and football teams, and we spend the evenings after practice playing games and doing his homework. He's an incredible kid, and I wouldn't be half the man I am today if he hadn't arrived so early. Story number 59. Met my beautiful wife. We met on an app called Meet Me, which used to be called My Yearbook, and was looking for people to burn time with between courses, as I had 3 hours or so between 2 of them, due to the pool being shut down for renovations and the swim team canceled. Anyway, really cute girl who went to the same college was asking about some different anime to watch. I made a few suggestions on the post, which many people were, and didn't get a reply. I didn't think much about it until later that day, then decided to just send her a private message asking her what she liked to read and watch. And then, fast forward to today, here I am with 2 precious children, and the most beautiful woman in the world is my wife. We bought our first home last year, so we now have an anime gaming room full of manga, figures, games, 2 gaming PCs, the works. Really can't believe how happy I am today, all because of a random thought to send a message. Oh, wow, I remember the Meet Me app. What an awful time. It's like a dating app, but like kind of not really, but it is. I was never there for My Yearbook era, but I hate dating apps. I hate being single, not because of the loneliness, but because dating apps are just awful. Hey, pay $50 to see who liked you. Who's paying that money? Stop enabling these companies. And also, did you know that Match Group, the people who made Match.com, just own every dating app? Everything they touch turns to crap. Anyway, next story. Story number 60. Not me, but my niece. She was born with a disorder that doesn't even have a name. They misdiagnosed her with hemangiosis, but they attempted to treat them as such, and they got worse. For those not familiar, hemangiosis are non-cancerous tumors that occur on the blood vessels. They spent the first few years of her life trying different things to cure her, and they all failed. Fortunately, her doctor was very smart and well-versed in these type of vascular disorders, and he came up with an idea. Basically, he used an embolization procedure that has never been used on a child, and has also never been used to treat something like her disorder. Fortunately, it worked. According to him, she made medical history. He asked if he could bring her to a medical conference he was going to, but she was about 5 at the time, and my sister wasn't really comfortable with that. And honestly though, my niece has been through a lot. She's currently 12 now, and she has had close to 40 surgeries on her face. Her last few were reconstructive and plastic surgery to attempt to correct the scarring that was left from all over from the failed procedures. She's been through the ringer, but she is a great kid. At first glance, it's hard to tell that she has ever had anything wrong with her, but if you look closer, you'll see a lot of light scars, but we're hoping that they will fade as she gets older. Story number 61. These past 4 months have been this for me. Breast cysts, breast tumors, and basal cell skin cancer all run in my family. It used to be 35 when you started getting checked for these things. So I asked about it at my physical last year. She said the age to get mammograms, even with my history, is 40 unless you feel a lump, and she felt a lump. The doctor's office effed up and didn't get me in for the emergency mammogram for 2 weeks. The cyst burst during that time, and I was in extreme pain. Got the mammogram, no more cyst, but they could see a bruise on the tissue where it was. Instead, on the same breast in a different location, they found a tumor. Had to get it biopsied. Biopsy day was the same day I had my dermatologist appointment to give my skin a checkup, so I had to cancel. The biopsy came back good, just a fiber tumor. Dermatology appointment 2 weeks after initial appointment set. Everything looks great, but I have a freckle on the same breast that's on the bra line. I hate it because every now and then the bra rubs it raw. They said it looks fine, but I hate it. Let's remove it. The biopsy says basal cell carcinoma, and they are shocked. Totally didn't look like it. Because of my age and location, they send me to their big wig downtown. Get to that appointment, it's apparently an extremely rare thing called pincus type. And pincus type has been argued about in the dermatology world a lot in the past 5 years. Extremely rare, grows fast and deep, but from the research I've read, there's no known instance of cancer from it. They are concerned since the growth had been there 10 years, they will have to scrape a lot. Well, thankfully, they got it all off on the first scrape. Easy as pie. And it turns out my mother and grandfather had the same type removed from their bodies. I'd like to think we'll be in a medical journal, and both of my aunts on that side have been in a medical journal for their own really effed up and weird body crap. Story number 62. This happened during the 1989 earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area. I had season tickets to the Giants that year, and they headed to the World Series with the A's in the Battle of the Bay. At that time, I worked at a big laboratory. I had my own small office with no windows, and my desk faced the door with 5 huge file cabinets against the wall right behind my desk. I was never one to leave work on time at 5 p.m. I would always leave about a quarter after, and since I had series tickets, I was able to get tickets to the World Series. I snuck out of work early so that I could make it to the game, with my boss's blessings. Well, the earthquake hit at 5:04 p.m. while I was walking into the parking lot to Candlestick Park. Being outside, I didn't think it was that bad of an earthquake until I made it inside the park and noticed the big screen was black and the electricity was knocked out. So I turned on my Sony Watchman to see that it was much bigger with the Bay Bridge being broken. The laboratory I worked at also wasn't up to earthquake standards, and it wasn't until about 2 months later when I was allowed to enter my work wearing a hard hat to gather some files that I noticed all of the cabinets had come crashing down onto my desk, breaking it in half. If I didn't go to the World Series, I would have been dead. And on another interesting note, my sister began the first day of her job as a 911 operator in a city in the East Bay on that same day. Her shift started at 5 p.m. The earthquake started 4 minutes later. What a way to break into that job. Story number 63. More like 1 and 0, but whatever. I received a comment on YouTube from some kid named Joshua Kalimnik. I'd watched a few videos of his performances in musicals, and we hit it off, became friends. Then he said that the cast and crew of my favorite show loved my reaction videos. They watched them, enjoyed them, and were willing to meet me. At the time, Odd Squad was a little-known show that had just premiered. Justifiably, is still little known to this day. Well, I eventually found out I was talking to Joshua Kalimnik, who was famous for his role as Odd Todd on the show. We got to talking on Twitter, followed each other, and we became best friends. I also interacted with some of the Odd Squad on Twitter, including Tim McKeon, who's best known for Gravity Falls and Adventure Time. Super nice people. Unfortunately, he and I fell out of touch, but I'm regarded as the cast and crew's favorite, which now puts me on a really high pedestal, but I'm humble about it. Story number 64. 2 years ago, I was carrying a box and got severely winded. After a few hours of pestering from my coworkers and girlfriend, I agreed to see a doctor. By then, I felt fine and almost went home, but stuck it out thinking I had walking pneumonia or something at most. Turns out it was a fungal lung infection called cryptococcosis. The actual infection isn't that rare, it kills tons of people every year. The thing that makes my case extremely rare is it's supposed to only infect people with an immune system issue. Mine is fine. It's extremely rare to get this if you don't have HIV, sarcoidosis, something along those lines. The progression in my case was severe. My lungs were full of nodules and cavities. The look of horror and shock that I wasn't immobilized and miserable on every doctor and nurse's face over the next couple of years never stopped being terrifying. I've compared my CTs to other cases I found online, and the difference is striking. It never progressed beyond my lungs, though. If this fungus gets to your brain, it causes meningitis, and your mortality rate goes up to something like 30%. Since I'd apparently had it without knowing for a long time, this was shocking to my doctors as well. I spent a month in the hospital on $10,000 a day dose daily IV meds, and then another year and a half on strong oral meds that messed my liver up. I'm being studied by a group at NIH to see if something in my genetic background explains why I didn't die. I have a significant amount of scar tissue in my lungs, but it's only noticeable when it's hot and humid out when I'm working out. I also gained maybe 20 pounds, lost some muscle mass in the hospital, and picked up a good amount of medical debt from all the CT scans and lumbar punctures, but otherwise, I don't think about it much anymore. Story number 65. Definitely not one in a million, but I had a pretty rare pregnancy. I had rising HCG levels that were almost normal but a little slow to start, so they were suspicious of ectopic. They realized it was ectopic after an empty ultrasound and gave me a shot of methotrexate. HCG still rose and I had another shot. Most ectopic pregnancies terminate after this, but still, mine didn't. It finally burst and I had a lot of internal bleeding. My heart rate went down to 40 in the ambulance and I kept losing my hearing weirdly. Surgery found that it was on my ovary, which is also extremely rare. So I don't know the odds, but rare ectopic, rare to not terminate with shot, rare on ovary. It was scary, but at the time I didn't realize that I really could have died from this had I not known the signs to look for. I called the on-call doctor the night before because I was feeling kinda off, and she said I was probably fine and to see how I was in the morning. 5 a.m., and I'm feeling bad, and decided to call an ambulance. Glad I did. I almost had my husband drive me, which would have resulted in waiting in the waiting room to be seen, all while bleeding internally. Story number 66. I'm not the 1 in a million, but I am the 0.1% chance guy, which might be 1 in a million, I don't actually know math. Anyways, when I was going for the police force, I had to take a TB test. The first one came back clean, and they said we had to do a second one. I asked why, and they said they'd never seen it before. It's like a 0.1% chance, but I could be a carrier and not know it. Well, guess whose arm got insanely inflamed? I'm like Typhoid Mary, but with TB. Then I was also bitten by a brown recluse in the 5th grade in Arizona, which is rare. The doctors thought there was so much nerve damage that my body wouldn't be able to heal correctly without assistance from skin grafting. But then, it healed anyways. Doctors said it was a miracle. And then, whenever I go in for strep throat, I always take the test, and it says I don't. But the test they send into the labs always comes back true. It's gotten to a point where my doctor just puts me on the medication when I come in, thinking I have strep throat, which is like once a year. Then, I broke my back, which totally healed fine without any repercussions, and I guess I'm just insanely lucky. There's more to it, but I don't want to jinx it. Story number 67. So, I had a buddy that lived in a smaller town from me, about an hour drive through nowhere to get to. On a Wednesday night, he invites me up. I didn't have anything else going on, so I agreed. We went to eat, and I had a beer. We got bored, and about the only other source of entertainment we could find is going to the local strip club. Ended up staying there until around 2 a.m. just cause it wasn't a bad way to pass the time. When we were leaving, I wanted to get back as I had work the next day, and the buddy offered for me to crash on his couch. I felt fine and literally only had drank the 1 beer at dinner, so I'm like, nope, I'll head home. Then on the way home, the monotony of driving started to wear on me, and I started to nod off, which at the time I never believed could actually happen to someone. I was young and stupid, and there was just like micro winks in and out, but it was enough that my level of alertness wasn't great. Eventually, I came up to a car that wasn't going the speed limit, but just fast enough that I would have to speed past, so I am about 50 feet behind it. Well, and then he slammed his brakes. I see red lights flare and I slam my brakes, and then my car, my Chevy Trailblazer, starts to fishtail. I started to countersteer to correct this, and the car literally did a 180, then both my left tires blew. This was a couple of months before a national Goodwill tire recall which I had, and then my car started to roll. The experience inside was staring at the windshield like time had stopped. Then the front glass shattered, but because it's safety glass, it just looked like a TV I was watching turned to static. I rolled 3 times and was just sitting there speechless. A guy who was traveling behind me came up and said, "Please don't be dead." And I said I was fine. And he asked if I could get out of the car, which I did. We walked back up to the road, and then I started to freak out about what happened. Then the paramedics came and strapped me down to a board, and I went into shock, which is a very unusual experience. They initially thought I was a DUI because of the beer I had on my breath, but later I disproved that with a test. I was discharged around 4:30 and was able to contact my fiancé at the time to come take me home. Predates the age of Uber. The following day, I visited the car lot where my car had been towed to, and not only did every single part of the car have some type of damage, there was a literal hole in the top right above the driver's seat, which apparently was when the car rolled, it hit a fence post and punched through. I never knew that at the time. Everyone on the lot was double taking me as the guy who was in that car, to the point where they were bothering their buddies to let them know, "Dude, that guy with the wreck of a car, he's here, and he's totally okay." They all had assumed it was a fatality. The worst injury I got from the ordeal is the nurse in the ER insisting I get a tetanus shot. Even after the fact, because my car was a lease, my insurance company payoff exceeded the buyout value, and I walked away from the entire thing a couple grand richer. I was a lucky SOB for this experience, and upon reflection, there was easily a million other things that could have happened that didn't, that would have made it a nightmare. And as a PSA, a couple of things I'd like to share if you stuck with me this far. 1. Driver alertness is something that goes down when you get tired. No matter how silly it sounds about falling asleep while doing something that active, it can totally happen. And 2, if you ever experience an accident like that, unless there is immediate danger, like the car is on fire, encourage whoever is involved to stay put. Since I've shared this story, I've heard many examples of where someone who was fueled by adrenaline moved out of the situation and it was masking some type of broken spine that moving made worse. So, fellow viewers who's been in a car accident recently, hopefully none of us. I was hit by a drunk driver one time and then the guy said, "Hey man, I'd appreciate if this was neither of our faults." F you, neither of our faults, bro. I was gonna go get cookies and then you hit me with your Carvana rental car, you drunk POS. Anyway, back on topic. But about the video, it mainly became rare medical conditions, the video, with some other stories sprinkled in there. And, so many medical terms. But you know what, guys? We're at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a really good day, and bye-bye!